afraid somebody's going to steal your ideas and sell them to Hollywood, huh?
Perhaps. Would you like me to read you some poetry?
Sure, why not?
This is my favorite poet.
Who's
It
the
was
poet?
the divine Edgar.
Who's the divine Edgar? Edgar who?
Edgar Allan Poe, of course. It was night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year. Notice how he emphasizes this word. It was hard by the dim lake of Ulba in the misty mid-region of Weir. You see, he takes a word like dim in one line and twists it, you see? And it comes back as mid-region of Weir.
Mid-region. And twist it to dim. That's pretty good. Pretty clever.
Thus I pacified sight.
At the start of my Shining video, I Scream, I asked how long you thought it would take to deconstruct the most complex film of all time. And the answer for me was almost 2 years of relentless analysis. Imagine my surprise when it seemed it would only take 7 months to decode all of these, but decode here only means applying the same methods taught to us by The Shining. If you haven't seen that first video, don't worry. Everything can boil down into 3 techniques of analysis, but which you may never have considered before. Identifying the art objects on his shelves and walls tell us a little more about the scene and larger story. So when Alice Harford is saying,
"If you men only knew."
Behind her head is Helen of Troy, Rapa Nui, and the Olympiad series. Their daughter shares a name with the stolen queen of Greek myth. And Ziegler's wife is named Ilona.
Victor, Ilona, Alice, Bill.
Which is the Hungarian version of Helena, and is the name of that mythology's Queen of the Fairies. So what don't men know about the lives of mythological queens, even after millions of years of evolution? Right? Something the women of Easter Island could tell them? Rapa Nui was known to the indigenous people as Te Pita o Te Kainga Ahaumaka, a name that can mean navel of the world. And isn't it a naval officer who is about to inspire Bill's descent into Wonderland?
Do you remember one night in the dining room, there was this young naval officer, and he was sitting near our table with 2 other officers?
No.
The waiter brought him a message, which point he left. Nothing rings a bell?
No.
Maybe men need to know that marriage is not an escape from hierarchical thinking. Most years ought to be golden, but that doesn't mean the bronzes aren't out there.
I love Victor's art collection. Don't you?
Yes. It's wonderful.
He has a wonderful collection of Renaissance bronzes. The sculpture gallery is upstairs. Would you like to see it? I can show it to you. We won't be gone long.
This is basically the same as the first thing, only now applied to any number of other recurring motifs in the film. And whether it's the art objects or some other symbol code, he'll often alter these things between shots or between scenes to bury the significance or to distract us from what he's really saying. So, after Dr. Harford has his encounter with the homophobic Yale boys, there's a business behind his head called nipped in the bud. We can be sure of this thanks to the neon roses, which he had passed only moments ago, watching some kind of sexual transaction take place. And behind him then were the buildings we see in the right box, which would imply that they're the shops right around the corner from here, right? But when we see this restaurant later, the street that can be seen continuing on past nipped in the bud is now a dead end. Why would that be? Maybe the only way to understand why is to assemble all the available evidence and trace the path of codes. Finally, there's what I call the mirrorform. It means watching the film forwards and backwards simultaneously to look for key moments when visuals and/or the soundtrack harmonize in an interesting way. So when Bill's being grilled by the Red Cloak for the passwords, watch what happens.
May I have the password, please?
Fidelio.
On Fidelio, Milich's daughter appears in the reverse action, and when the subject of the second password comes up,
That's right, sir. That is the password for admittance. But may I ask, what is the password for the house?
Was it the second password? Is that what gave me away?
Yes, finally. But not because you didn't know it. It's because there was no second password.
but is that true? What did Milich's daughter whisper in Bill's ear? But that's the subject for the next video, which will look exclusively at Eyes Wide Shut, which is, so far as I can tell, the most complex of Kubrick's films, surpassing even The Shining.
Mr. Allen, what is in room 237?
Nothing. There ain't nothing in room 237.
In fact, I started there on my post-Shining Kubrick journey and thought I might stop there, but once I found that the Mirrorform was once again a cipher for decrypting the film's secrets, I thought, okay, is there a Kubrick film the Mirrorform would not help us understand better?
Tulip. Monica. David. Monica. All right. I wonder if I did that right.
Turns out, not only does it clarify the mysteries of all the rest, it even reveals how the individual films aren't just talking to themselves, they're also talking to one another. When the gang of Yale boys bark out their string of homophobic catcalls at Dr. Harford, there's one line of dialogue that doesn't show up in the film's subtitles when this guy goes, In 2001: A Space Odyssey, the main early hominid, the first to waken and notice the monolith, is named Moonwatcher. And in the Mirrorform, he's noticing the monolith at the same moment as Dave Bowman is staring out his escape pod window at a painting replicating the work of Francois Boucher, a name that, translated into English, could be Frank Butcher. Moonwatcher, Frank Butcher, Moon Puncher? So it's like this boy, by inventing this nonsense phrase, is unwittingly telling Dr. Harford that he is going to make an evolutionary leap within himself, not unlike the leap between Moonwatcher and Frank Butcher. In fact, when Bill later meets the gay hotel clerk at the Hotel Jaso, there's a thing advertising famed jazz musician Bill Watrous, who played trombone on one of my favorite jazz songs of all time, Deodato's Also Sprach Zarathustra, a song that might not exist if not for 2001: A Space Odyssey. What Bill's evolutionary leap is, we'll have to wait, but this is not the end of our trail of butcher crumbs. There's also the fact that Hal is responsible for the death of Dr. Frank Poole, so Hal is a bit of a butcher of Franks. As is Humbert when he shoots dead this painting of Frances Cook, a female Frank, how progressive, in a room with another Boucher painting, The Love Letter, which appears opposite Humbert giving Lolita the last expression of his so-called love, a check for $10,000. Another Boucher-style piece also appears as the rival apes go to war over this little pool, which I guess makes Moonwatcher a pool butcher. just as Bill and Ziegler debate the manner of Amanda Curran's curious demise around this red-soaked pool table.
And I have to be completely frank.
Alex DeLarge commits suicide above this pool table thanks to the vengeful spirit of a man named Frank.
Well done, Frank.
One of Joker's fellow recruits is named Franklin, and one is named 8-Ball, which is the last ball you sink in a game of 8-Ball, who becomes the first of the VC sniper's victims. The Frank subtext in The Shining is, as you'd expect, quite vast, but Jack is almost clubbed to death in the shadow of this pool table, which sits next to this photo by Franklin Silky, while some butchered Grady twins show up next to these. And that Frank photo also hangs next to the butchering of the Overlook's cook. Barry Lyndon features this Boucher piece, The Muse, appearing opposite a scene of Barry being rewarded for helping butcher the French on behalf of the Germanic Prussians, the very two peoples descended from those lovable barbarians known as Franks. That leaves Dr. Strangelove, where the president's right-hand man is Frank. Boucher can also be translated as mass murder, so there's a Frank sitting at hand when the president says,
"I will not go down in history as the greatest mass murderer since Adolf Hitler,"
with the opposite image being Jack D. Ripper, who was named for something of a mass murderer. And you know, the story might just end with every Frank in existence getting butchered. I guess there was just something about pools and cooks and the butchery of Franks that Kubrick thought we should think about. So, yes, to be fully literate of Kubrick's visuals, we need to consider 1, how literate he was of what he put in his frames. Then we need to consider 2, how these recurring motifs might be speaking within the film's context and or between films. And finally, 3, we need to study how the two sides of the story reflect one another. That's how simple our approach can be. But was he that simplistic? I stopped at Lolita for many reasons, but the main two are, first, how the next film back, Spartacus, was disowned by Kubrick in response to the studio meddling with the final cut. So had he been doing Mirrorform from the beginning, the meddling probably ruined the effect in Spartacus. And second, there just so happens to be quite a few allusions to Lolita in Eyes Wide Shut, like how the Harfords own a copy of Pearl's Kitchen, an extraordinary cookbook by Pearl Bailey, who played Frankie in 1953's Carmen Jones. And what should Charlotte have on her 1957 bookshelf but the Carmen Jones soundtrack? Or there's the way we get artifacts from the Ziegfeld Follies in obscure locations around Greenwich Village, like this hula dancer, which happens to be Lowe's exercise routine of choice. Or there's Modigliani's Standing Nude Elvira, one of at least 2, but maybe 3 paintings to ever appear in 2 of his films. Thanks to the research of fellow Kubrick analyst Julie Kearns, we know that this one features a 15-year-old runaway named Elvira, who became a sex worker presumably to survive street life, much as the 15-year-old Lowe will run away from Hum before finding that his alternative wasn't as great as he seemed.
But it never turned out that way, and instead he wanted me to cooperate with the others, making some kind of an art movie.
An art movie?
Bill's Elvira appears right after his last encounter with this geisha-style 15-year-old. But will she be able to run away from home? Does she want to? Has it even crossed her mind? So it really feels like Kubrick wanted us to regard the first and last of his final 8 films as the sexual growth stories, the next 2 in as the insanity of war stories, the next 2 as the science and evolution stories, and the middle 2 as the society versus the individual stories. And you know, I've come to wonder if this is the real reason that his Holocaust and Napoleon films were never realized. Had they appeared after Full Metal Jacket, their opposite number was doomed to be Lolita. And how would that work? That said, you can probably imagine how aptly Aryan Papers would have sat across from the next film back after the disowned Spartacus, Paths of Glory. Or a final scene in the Napoleon picture mirroring the end of The Killing, with the French Emperor's grand designs all going up in smoke. Now, before we get into the thick of it, I have 2 more points. I've written enough over the past 3 years to make an ice cream length video for each title, but I think that's too much ice creaming. I'm sorry. If these windows into Kubrick's mind don't feel quite as thrown wide as before, my website awaits, where you'll find everything you're about to see here and much, much more. And 2, I think I need to show you his quote about how to ruin the Mona Lisa. Have the artist sign it with an explanation of its mysteries. He especially didn't want this for 2001. This has caused me to wonder if he would want us talking about the wonders of the Mirrorform at all. But then, why do it on every single picture? Why lay out a trail of breadcrumbs if they're not meant to be followed or understood? Why hold up this mass mirror to the audience if we aren't meant to see the reflection? Are we really not supposed to have an answer to the question? Why?
Now answer my question or you'll be standing tall before the man.
I think I was trying to suggest something about the duality of man, sir.
The what?
The duality of man, the Jungian thing, sir.
Whose side are you on, son?
So for each title, I thought we would look at the large-scale nature of how each story was structured, and then consider 1 or 2 of the major code sequences that can be traced. Full Metal Jacket, coming 7 years after the arch complexity of The Shining, features one of the simplest structures, which you can probably visualize without my telling you. There's the boot camp sequence.
Sir, yes, sir! Private Joker, why did you join my beloved corps? Sir, to kill, sir! So you're a killer? Sir, yes, sir! Let me see your war face!
The middle part, where Joker lives the life of a frustrated journalist.
You get wasted your first day in the field and it'd be my fault.
A high school girl could do my job.
And the final part, where Joker reunites with Cowboy and joins his company for their push into the Perfume River area.
I'm not trying to run this squad. I'm just saying we can't leave her like this.
If you want to waste her, go on. Waste her.
What is your major malfunction, numbnuts? Didn't Mommy and Daddy show you enough attention when you were a child?
Just as Pyle is blowing away Hartman and his own animalized self, opposite side Joker is meeting Animal Mother for the first time with his I Am Become Death helmet. You may have noticed a similarity in the way these 2 characters look and speak.
You're a real comedian.
Well, they call me the Joker.
Well, I got a joke for you.
Joker. Everybody hates me now. Even you.
Joker's boss during the middle section is named Lockhart. And it just so happens that Hartman explodes over a loose lock.
Jesus H. Christ. Private Pyle, why is your footlocker unlocked?
Sir, I don't know, sir!
At which point in the back half, we're transitioning between Joker and Cowboy just roaming around sort of aimlessly, and their battle with the Lady Sniper. On the front side, Hartman's loose lock explosion marks a transition between the 2 halves of the boot camp sequence. In the first half, he's been trying to reform Pyle's discipline issues on his own, and in the second half, he punishes everyone else anytime Pyle makes a mistake. Leading to the sequence where they beat Pyle with endless bars of soap, which happens opposite the selling of this sex worker, with who knows how many Johns in her past.
Remember, it's just a bad dream, fat boy.
Oh,
Ow! Ow! No! Ow! Ow!
This loose lock transition happens at the same time as the back half makes its transition, expressed through the death of Cowboy's platoon leader, Crazy Earl. We meet Crazy Earl right as Hartman is getting blown away, Hartman's blood seeming to explode out of Earl. So the story basically breaks down into these 5 chunks. And as Pyle is broken down on one side, his mirror self, Animal Mother, is taking greater and greater charge on the other side. There's a similar duality going on between Joker and Cowboy. They also look and talk alike.
Been getting any?
Only your sister. Well, better my sister than my mom, though my mom's not bad.
But there's also a little Cowboy in Joker from the beginning, when he imitates John Wayne, the epitome of 20th century cowboy icons, usually in moments when he's feeling awkward and threatened.
Well, Pilgrim, only after ya eat the peanuts out of my shit. I am in a world of shit.
And just as Hartman and Pyle murder-suicide in a bathroom they call the Head,
What is this Mickey Mouse shit? What in the name of Jesus H. Christ are you animals doing in my head?
Cowboy is shot to death through a gap in a building featuring Vietnamese words that can be translated as the mind, by a woman who will beg to be shot in the middle of her head, as if saying, "Finish the job. Finish the job." How symbols largely speak to the other side of the film is through the drawings on the helmets of the soldiers, like how, as Cowboy dies from his shot through the mind, Joker's bullseye is floating over Hartman's head. There's a ton of examples like that, really, but the art references that caught my attention the most come from the names on the Marines' jerseys, which speak to Kubrick's other films. Corey was the name of the actor playing the raped Mrs. Alexander in A Clockwork Orange, and Rossini is the composer responsible for a few of that film's soundtrack songs. A John Updike novel appears in Eyes Wide Shut, while Jimmy Carter is pretty openly referenced in The Shining. Not to mention the fact that this is all happening atop an 11-rung ladder, a la Jacob's Ladder, which a recurring song in The Shining is all about.
Do you think that'll get the job?
So if 8-Ball is our connection to Kubrick's various butchered pool images, it's worth noting that the Marine who tries to go save him is named Doc.
We're not leaving Doc J and 8-Ball out there. Doc J and 8-Ball are wasted.
Doc J and 8-Ball get shot finally to death opposite these other Kubrick references climbing by. Kubrick himself is heard and not seen in the film as the mild-mannered and totally ineffectual Commander Murph.
You're senior NCO, Cowboy. You're in charge.
And last appearing as Cowboy gets shot through a hole in the mind that wasn't there a moment earlier.
Donna, give me that radio. Murphy, this is Cowboy, over.
All right, what does it all mean? I think it's this. First, we have the relationship between body and mind, and then the struggle for a master art maker to create art that has a real impact on the subject matter it's grappling with. Great art requires a sensitivity and vulnerability to one's emotional life and the emotional lives of others, but it also requires the discipline to do what needs to be done, to both realize what you want your work to be, and to get it past the completion line. If you live only for your head, you'll start to forget what the other is going through when you tie them up and beat them or buy sex from them. But if you live only for your mind, how will you protect yourself when the heads come knocking? The reality of war is that it requires a sort of groupthink and a sort of selflessness. If you cared about what happened to your head or your mind as a result of war, you would be wise to run screaming and never return. But if you're going to be a soldier or a filmmaker, there's a balance to strike between the reality of your individuality, your body and mind, with the need for you to be selflessly part of the group effort. As characters get shot on one side of the film, their blood seems to explode out of the character on the other side, who is usually either Pyle or Joker. These men are dying in ways they can't even detect. Pyle's suicide makes Joker leery of other such haunted men, but his love for Cowboy lures out his feeling side too much in too dangerous a place. Watching Cowboy die is like watching himself die. And when the opportunity comes for him to fulfill his one wish, to kill somebody, he's felt the death of his fellow head and fellow mind too deeply. He felt them as his own, and he fails to realize that this murder will be a suicide.
You, John Wayne? Is this me?
Who said that? Who the fuck said that? Who's the slimy little communist shit twinkle-toed cocksucker down here who just signed his own death warrant?
Skipping over The Shining, the next film back is Barry Lyndon. This one splits almost straight down the middle. The first half is the story of the fatherless Redmond Barry's many adventures fighting against incredible odds to rise above his peasant origins and instincts, with Lady Lyndon appearing a minute and a half past the hinge, at which point it becomes all about his fight to cope with upper-class boredom, his fight against a fatherless stepson who wants him dead, and his fight to overcome his peasant origins and instincts that threaten irreversible financial ruin. And I say fight because that's what the Mirrorform reveals more than anything. This is a story about dueling. It opens on Barry's father being killed in a duel, and its very center is a more vigorous, less deadly duel. 9 minutes of Barry trading shots with his stepson, Lord Bullingdon, links up with a 5-minute sequence of Barry dueling Captain John Quinn. Then his mother's battle of wits with Reverend Runt takes us to the highwayman standoff with Captain Feeney, followed by 5 minutes with a soldier named Toole, a little swordplay with his son Brian, a lengthy skirmish with the French that overlays a brawl with Lord Bullingdon, caused by a whipping, which was caused by a spanking. Then we have this Prussian officer getting whipped, which leads into this superior little Englishman getting whipped, while an opposite figure fires his gun straight at the young lad's heart. If we count card games, this would account for much of the middle of the film, but if not, then this proposal of a duel occurs right across from this verbal duel with Sir Charles Lyndon, becoming one of 2 instances in the story of something Barry does resulting in someone else's death.
I hope you're not thinking of leaving us soon, Sir Charles.
And the other death he causes isn't John Quinn. That duel was a conspiracy designed to get Barry out of Berryville.
He recovered from his wound. The shot you hit him with was not likely to hurt him, for it was only made of tow. Tow?
No, the one death Barry definitely creates is his own son's. Right across from his having everything in the world taken from him, everything in the world is taken from him. Barry buys Brian a horse that lifts the boy high into the sky before dropping him down to his disabling and death. The last shot in the film shows Wilton House, which has a ceiling painted to show the Daedalus and Icarus myth, the story of a father who designed wings of wax that worked for the father, but fell the son. And Barry kept this horse with a man named Doolin.
I'm sorry to trouble you with this, Mr. Lyndon,
but I believe Master Brian may have disobeyed your orders and stolen away to Doolan's farm.
This all playing out right across from his duel against Tool, which ends with Barry being hoisted into the triumphant sky. Doolan worked for the father, but fell the son. Or to put it another way,
Barry was one of those born clever enough at gaining a fortune, but incapable of keeping one. For the qualities and energies which lead a man to achieve the first are often the very cause of his ruin in the latter case.
the frustrating fact is that Charles Lyndon was sort of right to doubt Barry's fiscal sophistication.
He wants to step into my shoes. He wants to step into my shoes.
A concept that Bullingdon is sort of right to later parody, using Brian as his unwitting cat's paw.
Don't you think he fits my shoes very well, your ladyship?
But they are only right in light of the particular societal structure they find themselves in.
Dear child, what a pity it is I am not dead for your sake.
Barry did all this fighting and double-crossing to reach a level where he wouldn't have to fight for everything.
When I take up a person, Mr. Lyndon, he or she is safe. There is no question about them anymore. My friends are the best people. Oh, I don't mean that they're the most virtuous, or indeed the least virtuous, or the cleverest, or the stupidest, or the richest, or the best born, but the best. In a word, people about whom there is no question.
And where his son would never have to be denied anything.
Will you both promise me something?
Yes.
Promise me never to quarrel so, but to love each other, so that we may meet again in heaven, where Bullingdon said quarrels and people would never go.
We promise.
But you can't sword fight the numbers in your ladyship's bank account. And if you think you can duel with death itself, you will lose. And where will your sense of fight be then? Even when your opponent is as hateful and devoid of honor as can be imagined.
I have not received satisfaction.
Perhaps this is why the cousin who propelled him onto this quest for honorable good standing was named Nora.
Yes, if Mr. Barry will apologize and go to Dublin, I will consider the whole affair honorably settled.
While the woman he marries for convenience is named Honoria.
Mr. Redmond Barry, the last occasion on which we met, you wantonly caused me injury and dishonor, in such a manner and to such an extent as to which no gentleman can willingly suffer without demanding satisfaction, however much time intervenes.
Honor, in both these cases, means only, I want the woman, Nora, Honoria, who's been throwing herself at you, because...
I'm an Englishman, I am, and a man of property.
Or to put it more poetically,
I have borne as long as mortal could endure the ill treatment of the insolent Irish upstart whom you have taken into your bed.
In fact, the open feud between Barry and Bullingdon begins with a painting by Jean-Honoré Fragonard hanging behind Barry's head. Fun fact, this happens to be the other of the two, maybe three, paintings that appear in multiple Kubrick films, this one appearing behind Hubbard as he comes to demand satisfaction from Claire Quilty.
Hey, you're a sort of bad loser, Captain. Didn't anyone ever tell you? It's not really who wins, it's how you play, like the champs.
But yes, Barry Lyndon is the tale of a quest, first in Ireland, then much of the rest of Europe, for honor. Like the honor it takes to control your rage when the men in your life seem determined to tear everything down. And since we're talking paintings, if you've seen Barry Lyndon, you know this is one Rococo-riddled affair. But what's unique here is how the artworks are the artworks that really hang in these real buildings. So I began to wonder if there was really a point in identifying them, since they might very well be incidental. And from what I've ID'd so far, I would say yes, that Kubrick's cleverness here wasn't making these real places seem incidental to bury what he's using their paintings to say. Like this piece, Tobias and the Angel, appears opposite Barry stealing the identity of a gay soldier. In the story, Tobias meets an angel, but he's unaware the man's an angel, and this angel tells Tobias what to do with a giant fish he's caught. In Barry's story, he's taken the garb from the angelic John Fakenham, and uses this disguise to fall into the care of the woman Lyschen, a German name meaning fish. His cover story during this passage is that he's on his way to see one
General Williamson. Yes. General Percival Williamson,
who shares a name with a knight of King Arthur's who was seeking the Holy Grail, and instead found the Fisher King.
Sergeant!
Perhaps this is why the film's final duel takes place in a building that sits at the foot of Glastonbury Tor, which legend has it was the original Avalon. And it's since been theorized that the hill's terraces used to function as a giant labyrinth. That brings us back to Daedalus, whose escape from the labyrinth is what he's best known for, and as a snapshot of a man's life, inspires our sympathy completely. Less sympathetic is his origin story, where he murders his nephew for showing signs of brilliance that may one day outshine his own. The gods transform the nephew into a partridge, however, and it's this very bird that appears to gloat over Daedalus after exiting the labyrinth as he buries his fallen son. Knowing this, we can almost appreciate why the maze-making mastermind should have been imprisoned, and in a cage of his own designing, which he'll need to be even cleverer now to escape. The center of Barry's story has him courting Honoria at the Blenheim Water Gardens, a short walk from their famous hedge maze. Note the Greek key design around the base of the Borghese gladiator statue, itself symbolic of labyrinths. The final phase of Daedalus's life has him pursued by the king who imprisoned him in the labyrinth, now tempting Daedalus out of hiding with the allure of solving a riddle involving a spirally seashell. Thanks to the Mirrorform, the final phase of Barry's life now reflects over Shell Cottage, a building famously covered head to toe in little shells from the sea, moments after the end of his final duel amidst the partridges and doves. Daedalus solved his shell riddle. But did Barry? One answer is to go back to the fishy Lyschen, who appears opposite Barry being entranced by
Ludovico Cordi, a disciple of Alessandro Allori. It's dated 1605 and shows the adoration of the Magi.
If Barry had only realized that glory lies not in weaving grand designs, but in a simple life with a good-hearted partner who loves him and whom he loves, he might not have overlooked this boon as severely as he does. But perhaps this is because there's one more labyrinth Kubrick designed for Barry that is almost impossible to detect. A labyrinth of history. Lady Lyndon signs 3 checks throughout the film. Absurd because they tell us the story ends in 1789, when Brian was to turn 9, despite Barry marrying Lady Lyndon.
A year later, on the 15th of June, in the year 1773,
and how,
at the end of a year, her ladyship presented Barry with a son.
These dates just don't make sense. But by setting Barry's first experience in warfare during the 7 Years' War, as does the source novel, Kubrick establishes a timeline that's a little harder to wriggle out of. The narrator tells us,
Though this encounter is not recorded in any history books, it was memorable enough for those who took part.
But then, when Barry is fleeing the service, he encounters Lyschen, who tells him,
There is nothing to eat something since Brunbook.
This would most likely make Barry's skirmish something very much from any history book, the Battle of Grunberg, which took place in 1761. For the part of the adult Lord Bullingdon, Kubrick cast the late great Leon Vitali, who was 28 when the film debuted. So if the story really ends in 1789, this would be 28 years from Barry encountering Lycian, and maybe, just maybe, 27 years from the birth of a child they might have created together. It's as if Barry passed up a Christ baby for some kind of shadow Christ. You know, maybe Barry and Lycian got it on the very same night that... well, never mind that mental image. So if this is the labyrinth, how does one escape such a confusion of history? This brings me to super condense one of my favorite concepts, being a lover of history and herstory myself. The film happens to be exactly 789 shots long. So it occurred to me that each shot could be symbolic of every year going from 1001 to 1789, from King Arthur days to the French Revolution. I wish we had time to cover more than 0.1% of these, but this would put Barry's return to the UK in the year corresponding to the shot where he's banished from England forever.
Shall we get down to the matter at hand? Lord Bullingdon has instructed me to offer you an annuity of 500 guineas a year for life. Specifically on the condition of your leaving England and to be stopped the instant of your return.
We never learn exactly when Barry was born, but we know he was old enough to die for King George III in 1761, so I'm putting my money on 1742, corresponding to the moment Barry throws his life away, trying to be honorable. This would mean the bulk of his young life, the loss of his father, the loss of his first love, the loss of his homeland and his dear uncle, corresponds to the 6 shots of him learning that he will forever lose the use of his left leg.
Lose the leg? What for?
The simple answer for that is to save your life.
Culminating in shot 761, when the man, approaching what most would hope to be the middle of their existence, crumples into tears, perhaps looking back on a life of such losses, perhaps even remembering the little life that got away.
What did you say? What's your name?
I don't want to get too bogged down in cross-references, because we could do that all day with Kubrick's canon, but there's a cute structural thing going on between these two mirror forms that bears observing, and might be the thing meant to draw our attention to the 4-year gap between these releases as the true midpoint of Kubrick's career. There's barely a moment of A Clockwork Orange's Mirrorform where one of the Barry Lyndon actors isn't on screen. I was originally going to walk us through each example minute by minute, but it's probably safe to jump things to this image, color-coded so you can see who was playing who and at what points. This is what we can say for certain, but it leaves out an 8-minute period of Clockwork, which primarily features Alex's brothers, Georgie and Dim, arguing for egalitarianism on one side, and them drowning Alex on the other. And it leaves this 9-minute period of the Lyndon Mirrorform, which is consistently about Barry's relationship with the Prussian Captain Potzdorff. And that just seemed like too much of a near miss to me, so I went looking for our friend, the great German actor Hardy Kruger, and wouldn't you know it, his doppelganger is sitting beside our German opera singer here. As for Georgie and Dim, their doppelgangers are standing by as Barry is recruited into King George's army, though only Georgie seems to have followed him into King George's service. So, aside from how this guy played this guy and this guy played this guy, These two appeared in the same 3 films and only these 3. And this guy allegedly played 7 of these guys. Generally speaking, post-Spartacus Kubrick doesn't repeat his main actors very often, except in these 2 films. A Clockwork Orange is like a masquerade of Barry Lyndon actors. Or is it the other way around? Since these 2 are practically unrecognizable in their opposite roles. What's more, it struck me that the main 4 figures are all father figures of one sort or another in the lives of the protagonists. Father Graham is literal, with Graham only showing up after the death of the Lyndon family's other father figure. Chaplain Grogan is close to literal, but the other neat thing here is that he and Patrick McGee's characters play opposite roles in both timelines. Grogan appears throughout Barry Lyndon's first half, while Mr. Alexander appears throughout Clockwork's first half, and the chaplain appears on both sides of the middle end, as does the Chevalier du Barry. And did you notice that both of Patrick McGee's characters have names that conceal the protagonist's name within them? Mr. Alexander for Alex, and Barry for Redmond Barry Lyndon. One of the amazingly few things from the source novel Kubrick neglected to tell you is that the book Mr. Frank Alexander is writing here is called A Clockwork Orange, the not-so-subtle implication being that author Anthony Burgess cast himself as the true victim of his own ultra-violent creation, only to give himself the satisfaction of turning the tables at the end, in 2 segments that Kubrick's Mirrorform puts side by side in a sort of narrative yin-yang, with the 2 Alexanders even swapping bathrobes. Meanwhile, Barry, the first reliable father figure in Barry's life, has a name that sounds exactly like Barry's hometown in the novel, Ballyberry. At the end, when Barry accepts his one-legged exile back to Ballyberry, the narrator tells us that
his life there we have not the means of following accurately. But he appears to have resumed his former profession of a gambler, without his former success.
Why would it be lesser success? Did he forget all his master's lessons? And Barry wasn't trained as a gambler. He was trained as a hustler. It might seem a narrow distinction, but it's one casinos understand well. And this narrator apparently does not. Opposite this closing narration, the opening narration at Shell Cottage is saying,
First love. What a change it makes in a lad. What a magnificent secret it is that he carries about with him.
On Secret, the movie's editing cuts to the still shot of Barry heading for home. The game here is called Irish Switch, a discarding game like Crazy Eights. The first move we see Nora make is to put down the 8 of hearts on her left side of the table. Yet somehow Barry then draws the 8 of hearts from the deck on his left side of the table. We may write this off as yet another little Kubrick absurdity, but what it can draw our attention to is how we have 2 kinds of narrative strangeness going on here. One, we have visuals and a timeline determined not to make sense, and 2,
first love.
We have a narrator who possesses intimate knowledge of Barry's inner workings from his distant past, and yet hasn't the means of following accurately the story of Barry's life past a certain point. Who is this guy? He can read Barry's thoughts in one place.
Their scarlet coats and swaggering airs filled Barry with envy.
But not another. Why?
I shall make you into a real magician now, brother. I shall show you the knot that never was.
You'll recall that Clockwork Orange is openly about who controls the narrative and how narrative can shape our thoughts and behaviors. Barry Lyndon may be taking this up a notch. So Barry's in this labyrinth of history, and at the risk of mixing our myth metaphors slightly, Bullingdon would seem to make a good Minotaur. But if so, then he's a well-read Minotaur, for in the novel, Bully quotes aloud from Shakespeare's Hamlet, The insubordination of that boy was dreadful. He used to quote passages of Hamlet to his mother, which made her very angry. And you can imagine why. Hamlet's enraged that his uncle would kill his father, marry his mother, and somehow everyone's okay with this? He stages a parody of his father's murder called the Mousetrap play, right before the eyes of the court, as a sort of Ludovico technique on the mind of the wicked King Claudius. So, bully may be more than just an angry bullman, charging at every red flag. Barry canes Bullingdon 6 times as a child, 6 times as a young man, and gives him 6 wallops on the floor of his mother's ruined concert. The music for his final duel with Bullingdon goes on for 666 seconds exactly. And thanks to the incredible work of Julie Kearns, we know that the shot of Brian falling off his horse is the film's 666th. So it would seem that Barry's payback came from realms mortal and divine, from free will and destiny, from within the film's universe, and from Kubrick's cutting room floor. Now let's go back to our secret across from the magic 8s.
What a magnificent secret it is that he carries about with him.
This shot of Barry's missing leg was certainly a bit of visual trickery, and it lands on shot 777. If 666 is life's big trick on Barry, we can go back to 555 to find Brian riding in his later death coach at his magic show birthday party. Shot 111 is Barry fleeing the scene of the first big trick on his life, the fake duel against Quinn. Shot 222 is right after he's learned the truth of this trick. And 333 is right after the failure of his own first attempt at trickery.
You are a liar. You're an imposter. You're a deserter.
Which brings us to 444, Barry taking part in his most successful trick that we know of, involving a 4 of clubs, which takes Lord Ludd for thousands of louis d'or. When Barry gets the better of Ludd in shot 456, we don't realize it, but he's becoming an instant millionaire. We think he's only winning 5,000 louis d'or on top of whatever else Ludd owed at this point, but a louis d'or was worth 20 francs, a franc then being equal to $13 today. 13 times 20 times 5,000, 1,300,000. Imagine the value of the 15,000 Frederick d'or the Prince of Tübingen owes them. And these were not the only 2 games. Between leaving Prussia in 1763 and meeting the Lyndons in 1772. Yet the narrator would like us to think,
though they were swimming upon the high tide of fortune and prospering with the cards, they had little to show for their labor but some fine clothes and a few trinkets.
When the 4 of clubs trick occurs, the Lyndons are first appearing on the other side. So here's what I'm wondering. Were the Lyndons the big hustle? Is the Barry-Ballybarry relationship the true inverse of Alex and Alexander? Not a victim who becomes the abuser, but a beneficiary of Barry's selflessness, who returns the favor tenfold. First by teaching Barry how to rob the rich, and then by making him a true magician.
Wein oder Punch, Euer Gnade. Wein.
Opposite these magical 8s of hearts, Barry is leaving a hotel called the White Hart, and I suspect this is meant to say that Barry is departing England with a clean conscience. But how could it be clean with a dead son's blood on his hands? Well, what if Brian didn't die? What if Doolin really worked for the father?
I noticed the lad riding across the field, sir, and having trouble with the horse, which was playing up a bit. Suddenly the animal plunged and reared, and the poor lad was thrown.
What if Bullingdon's mousetrap play was but a mechanism in a far superior Ludovico technique.
Then it's true, thank you, Papa.
Now, before I justify this, let me just say, the two hardest things to believe about this, I feel, are that Barry could be so cruel to Honoria, and that Brian could be trained to go along with the ruse. But we are told from the start that it's a sham marriage, and Brian's account of his paralysis plays out entirely across from a father and son highwayman team. Also, we do see Brian gleefully destroying his mother's concert on behalf of Bullingdon. In fact, in the scene before, when Barry is drawing our attention to Ludovico Cardi, Lord Hallam is entranced by Boy with a Mousetrap, as though Barry already sees what's coming from his magic illiterate nemesis. The date for this painting is anywhere between 1684 and 1734, which would correspond to everything between Brian selling us on his early death
Give me your hand.
and Bullingdon tossing his cookies at the duel, realizing that his grand designs are about to turn to ashes in his mouth. The 7, let's call them trick shots, set us up to wonder what an 888 and 999 would have entailed in a story that would take us further into Barry's future. But it is these magic 8s that show up across from 777, and it is Brian's 9th birthday that becomes the object of what would be Barry's mousetrap.
Timmy, you take the horse over to Doolan's farm and tell him he needs a bit of breaking in. And say it's for Master Brian's birthday next week and I want it to be a surprise. And remember that yourself. Yes, sir.
And now I must reveal a little trickery of my own. It's true that Barry whips and beats Bully 6 times in the 3 scenes, but how the last beating begins is with a 19th punch to the back. And 19 is the number of heads in Barry's epic war story.
How many heads was it, says he, that you cut off? 19, says I, besides wounding several.
The same story little Brian requests again during his death, which ends with Barry breaking into his least convincing tears of the film when they really ought to be the most convincing.
And you should have seen the look on the Frenchmen's faces when 23 rampaging he-devil, sword and pistol, cut and thrust pell-mell came tumbling into the fort. In 3 minutes' time, we left.
And what do we see when Bully comes to challenge the duel? 6 portraits with their heads still on, behind Bully, and 6 portraits with their heads clean off, behind Barry. I thought it would help if we knew the identities of these personages, but it turns out that's impossible because these portraits are all fake.
Bill.
Suppose I told you that everything that happened to you there was staged. That it was a kind of charade. That it was fake.
Fake?
Yes. Fake.
Why would they do that?
It's not simply that Bully's approach leads him straight into a William Hogarth painting. The entire building is made up of artworks from British film history. The one on the far right is from 1964's Goldfinger, in what turns out to be a great many connections from the James Bond universe. Turns out, one of the reasons it's been so hard to identify many dozens of Kubrick's background paintings is thanks to this fact of them being in-house artworks sprinkled across decade after decade of British studio films, beginning at least by the late 1930s, and carrying on to the present. My favorite is one that appears in the Hammer horror classic, The Hound of the Baskervilles, featuring our very own Lord Wendover as Watson, fading into view right as Sherlock Holmes exclaims,
Really, I must pull myself together. I should have noticed this long ago.
But the one I must tell you about is the one directly above Bullingdon, which appeared in an episode of the 1960s espionage series, The Avengers. This was actually where my search for Kubrick mystery artworks began, after realizing that several of A Clockwork Orange's shooting locations were earlier used as locations for the series, while most of his actors earlier appeared on the show. The most significant for our current focus being the final episode of the series, where wealthy men can pay to have their deaths faked, and themselves spirited away into this underground paradise.
And another thing, they say that you can't buy your way into heaven, but I aim to try.
There's two major points about this. One, the boss of the heroes runs his base of operations out of a billiards room that features the same two paintings that appear in Ziegler's billiards room, positioned in the same fashion directly across from each other. This is the room, remember, where they discuss the true fate of Amanda and Nick.
Now look, I know what the desk clerk told you. But what he didn't tell you is all they did was put Nick on a plane to Seattle. By now, he's probably back with his family, you know, banging Mrs. Nick.
And the second thing is that the rich man in question, the one whose spiriting away draws the attention of our heroes, is Doolin of Doolin's Farm, the man huffing and puffing up the road with Brian's horse-fallen mass.
He's been stolen, taken away. There's a thief in our midst.
So I guess what I'm wondering is, could the secret story of Barry Lyndon be not a Daedalus parody so much as a Robin Hood parody, where Robin of Locksley, or is that Redmond of Longleat, is not a roving highwayman but a true master of wealth redistribution, blowing the Lyndon fortune into the pockets of his friends, and with a faithful mother at his side to help smuggle back to Ballyberry what needed smuggling.
For money, well timed and properly applied, can accomplish anything.
In fact, Ballyberry is where he left John Quinn, who was also in the Avengers once upon a time, as Robin Hood.
Well, I started from nothing. Now look at me. Half a dozen companies, villa in Cannes, 5 cars, 5 of them. I change them every year. Cost doesn't bother me.
Excuse me.
Mind being held up by her. Bit on the skinny side, though, like I'm plump myself.
While his darling Nora was still best known for playing Maid Marian in 1967's A Challenge for Robin Hood. Perhaps this is why the biggest score we see him make is against Lord Ludd, who shares a name with that other mythic denizen of Nottinghamshire, Ned Ludd, the modern Robin Hood, an inspiration for the Luddites, who smashed the machines of progress during the Industrial Revolution in order to keep the trade skills with which they'd been raised. They feared what this loss of capital production would mean for the common folk, and who among us can tell them they were wrong? It's nice to be able to walk into an air-conditioned diner and expect a hot coffee to be waiting, but are such conveniences worth the loss of $50 trillion from the common good? A process of upward wealth redistribution that has no mechanism for reversing itself?
Do you agree with him that we are drifting toward oligarchy?
I spent a little while just sort of going through the Forbes 400 list. And what you find is already there's an awful lot of inherited wealth in there. It's no longer a list of self-made men. And of the self-made men, a lot of them are pretty elderly. And those fortunes are going to be passed on to next generation. So no, the drift towards oligarchy is very visible, both casual observation and in the numbers.
I'd love to get sidetracked on modern economic theory, but the point is that the middle of Barry's story appears to be a sort of yin-yang for wealth redistribution. One side that would halt technological progress, even if it means keeping all the wealthy lords just as they are and all the slaves and serfs just as they are. against another side that would simply rob from the rich and give to the poor. But do all Robin Hoods give to the poor? What's to keep them from simply filling the shoes they've stolen?
Don't you think he fits my shoes very well, your ladyship?
Part of the answer in Barry's case may lay in what would be his alias, Grafton Elliot. Two names that appear separately in the source novel, Elliot being the name of an English minister mentioned once, who plays with Barry, and Grafton being the name mentioned once of a figure against which Barry loses Honoria's fortunes at horse race gambling. The decision to combine them is Kubrick's, and I wonder if it was lost on him that this was the name of Grafton Elliot Smith, who supported the paleoanthropological fraud known as the Piltdown Man, in which a human skull was mixed with an ape's to create the impression that the missing link was finally found. Smith was born after William Makepeace Thackeray died, so this could only be a spectacular coincidence where the source novel is concerned. But Kubrick may still be making a point about conspiracies here. Smith was the leading expert in his day on the evolution of the human brain, and his theories remain at the core of our current understanding of how Homo sapiens evolved from primates. He may have known more than we'll ever realize about the truth behind the fraud, but maybe he was just too tantalized by this discovery and how it legitimated his own theories to see the value in the counterpoints. Doesn't the fraud make the truth of the science harder to believe? I may be riding a similar line myself right now by even bringing this up, as this is basically my best evidence. The next best thing I have is how the name Grafton appears in the one novel that any Kubrick character mentions by its full name,
Portrait of the Artist is a Young Man by James Joyce, you might like.
which was first published 2 years after the discovery of the Piltdown Man. It's the name of a real street in Dublin, mentioned by the main character, Stephen Dedalus, on the last page. It happens to be a 7-minute walk from where Sackville Street, since renamed O'Connell, crosses the river, splits into two, and continues down to Grafton Street. Maybe better evidence will emerge, maybe not. But Barry's alias may be a reference to a man who wanted to believe in evolution even to the point of fraud. If Luddites are nasty and brutish for wanting to live like evolution and technological development doesn't exist, how different are the Robin Hoods really, if their potential for self-serving betrays the trust of the common folk? I mean, ask yourself, did you want Barry to turn out like this? Or Brian to turn out like this? In the final duel, that epic performance of Handel's Saraband is performed by two instruments in isolation. The cello, Billington's instrument of choice, and the drum, the instrument we associate with Barry's honor, and the magic party carriage in shot 555. And despite Bully's seeming victory, it is this drum that has the final word. As for our other friend and humble narrator, Alex DeLarge's story is rather the opposite of Barry's. Despite being an avowed murdering rapist, he's lionized for being the victim of a treatment that he specifically requested. And though it seems to end on a high note for Alex, the orgy scene is really just some kind of weird fantasy, following his signing up, without question, for a lifelong position with a rather sinister figure, the same man whose Ludovico technique stole away his ability to rape and murder and to enjoy Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. This is the Minister of the Interior, who in Barry Lyndon was that guy transfixed by a boy with a mousetrap. Barry's purchase of expensive Ludovico paintings is part of what's bringing ruin to his house, yet the Ludovico technique is what's bringing ruination to Alex's worst impulses. Impulses that were spurred on by... Ludovico is the Italian form of the German name Ludwig. So, since the very middle of the film is Alex signing up for the Ludovico technique, we've essentially got a German half of the story and an Italian half, with German and Italian composers trading hands all throughout the film. Which fascist will win the heart of our murdering rapist? We've kind of covered this one, but since we'll be glossing over 2001, I should at least tell you my favorite trail of Clockwork breadcrumbs, which starts with another quick tour through the Stanleyverse. Did Kubrick like pyramids, or did he just find them unavoidable? You may recall from Ice Cream how the lounge stairs and the hedge maze make little 237 pyramids. But I didn't make time to show how, when you overlay the Overlook's many blueprints, you get a parody of a particular plaza of Mesoamerican pyramids, the Great Pyramids of Teotihuacan. And I'll continue to neglect that study because we'll be covering it in a later video. But yeah, Lolita features this book, Maya, which features triangular Mayan temples on its cover. In Dr. Strangelove, we hear how
apparently the 23rd Airborne Division is stationed 7 miles away at Alvarado.
Alvarado was the name of a famed 16th century conquistador who devoted much of his later life to the search for El Dorado, the lost city of gold, which would have had some golden pyramids of its own. And when Redmond Barry is meeting his hometown hero for the first time, what he's really meeting is a pyramid. The song Wooly Bully that appears around the middle of Full Metal Jacket is by Sam Sham and the Pharaohs. And if we were to fold the Mirrorform not once, but twice, it would play atop that Tam Phung building, which can also translate to mean triangle. That's part of how I realized that film to be visually composed according to golden triangles, but I don't think we have time for all that. In Eyes Wide Shut, the orgy house was owned by George Herbert, that guy who paid to have King Tut's tomb exhumed. And wouldn't you know it, but the Hartford apartment looks just like King Tut's tomb from above. The one exception is the addition of little Helena's room, a girl who happens to share a name with the period of history that began with the death of Alexander the Great. I guess when you stare into the mummy's curse, the mummy's curse stares into you. In Clockwork, we get our most constant reference to ancient Egypt in
Alexander the Large, sir.
Which is an obvious play on Alexander the Great, himself a pharaoh, causing us to wonder constantly if this is the kind of person we want running a fruit stand, let alone the great power symbols of our society. So we could almost overlook the moment when a bright blue light lines up with this roving pyramid shape, as Alex says,
"Where I lived was with my dada and mum in Municipal Flat Block 18A, Linear North."
Kubrick was no stranger to having things be at linear north of one another. Or other kinds of alignment, as in the case of the octahedrons from the end of 2001, which could simply be 7 pyramids seen from above. And Egyptian pyramids were, of course, giant tombs, so perhaps that's why this synchronicity seems to either kill or resurrect Alex, depending on which side of the Mirrorform we're on. Well, there just so happens to be another prominent pyramid shape in the film, made of bricks. This one with an 18 and a B in the middle. And with no bright light clearly above it, until we apply the Mirrorform and see the Ludovico light at the exact same distance across the screen as the other light is at its moment of synchronicity. Only this light and this pyramid are destined never to align. Now, there's a disputed theory that the Great Pyramids of Giza were built to align with the stars known as Orion's Belt. Whether or not it's technically true, it's interesting that people think it's true, because the consensus goes that the pyramids were built 5,000 years ago, 7,000 years too late, and 19,000 years too early to really harmonize. This suggests someone back then understood something about what we call axial precession, where the Earth takes just under 26,000 years to complete a wobble. This wobble causes the stars in the night sky to slowly shift across the millennia, eventually returning to where they were 26 millennia ago. How we can best chart this shifting of the heavens is by tracking the pole star, something naval officers have used since the dawn of time to navigate the high seas, and which trades hands across 12 positions endlessly across the eons. One wonders what ancient peoples made of it when the navigation star they'd been using for hundreds of years was suddenly not so reliable anymore. These stars that, to them, were the dwelling place of the gods. If any ancient person did figure this out, it would be a remarkable feat, since we only first left Africa 3 to 4 wobbles ago and only started showing signs of language comprehension 2 wobbles ago. In fact, the ancient Teotihuacan may have also figured out what the Egyptians did, since that complex of pyramids is organized in a similar manner. Ditto for the ancient Chinese of Xi'an. You can decide for yourself whether you think there's any artistry behind the ancient architecture. I just care that Kubrick may have understood the theory and found it interesting, since the aligning light associates to Alex's home and seeming death, while the unaligning light associates to his home away from home and seeming rebirth.
I'm cured! Praise God!
So, if it is Orion we're meant to think of here, why Orion? I previously thought it had to do with this Giuseppe de Ribera style painting, like his Prometheus or Tithys. Orion was a rapist, like Tithys, whose eyes were stabbed out, only to be returned to him by a glorious sunrise. The song Pomp and Circumstance is a reference to Shakespeare's Othello, where he realizes he must extinguish the Promethean heat animating his love Desdemona, before she can cheat on him with an elder statesman like Lodovico. Her life he compares to a star, calling it a flaming minister, whose light will surely return in the morning.
I don't suppose you know who that was this morning, do you? That was no less a personage than the Minister of the Interior.
Ludovico made Alex blind to his old black and white self, teaching him the technicolor of empathy. But this minister will reverse this by a process like the opposite of art, rewarding Alex for supplying whatever interpretation comes to mind.
You know what you can do with that watch? Stick it up your ass!
Good.
But as apt as my assumption was, it was based on a false conceit. These paintings aren't about thieves or rapists, they're about the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian, better known to some LGBTQ2+ folks as history's first gay icon. Why would Alex, the rapist Delarge, be removing his set of lady lashes and sticking them above 2 paintings of a gay icon? In fact, why does Alex seem to have one feminine eye and one masculine eye? Well, first, let's look at the life of Saint Sebastian, who was outed as Christian in the year 286, resulting in his attempted murder by the Roman emperor of the day, Diocletian. Miraculously, Sebastian survived the multitude of puncture wounds and was able to provide Diocletian with a great shock 2 years later, having recovered from the skewering, and now speaking truth to power, condemning Diocletian for his campaign of violence against the religious underclass.
Before we know where we are, we shall have the full apparatus of totalitarianism.
At this point, the emperor has Sebastian put down for good.
Where is he now, sir?
We put him away where he can do you no harm.
But Alex seems especially taken with the part of Sebastian's story that foreshadows resurrection. Now, Alex probably just enjoys graphic torture imagery, but notice how the only other art in the room is by the same set of artist brothers, Herman and Cornelis McKink, as appear in the death chamber of Miss Alice Weathers, she of the red wig and green bodysuit appearing across from Alex's mum in her green wig and red bodysuit. Or how Alex's dad wears the yellow and orange of Frank Alexander. Or how Lodger Joe's redness reminds of Mary Alexander. Alex's homecoming becomes something like a Ludovico technique by life itself, surrounding him with subtle reminders of past and future victims. But does life itself tailor such coincidences? Or does it take the intelligence of human tailors, like Dr. Taylor, the one who undoes the Ludovico technique for Alex? And doesn't she bear a striking resemblance to the woman serving drinks at the Duke of New York? With an outfit that looks just like Alex's mum's in the later scene. Is there something Mrs. DeLarge would like to tailor about her son's existence? If so, notice how her red-yellow-purple ensemble is a color combination that later appears in the popsicles and clothes of Alex's threesome targets, in the draperies around his foursome of ancient harem girls, and in the outfit of the cop who punches Alex for grabbing the crotch of the blue-toned cop. In fact, the yellow shirt appears to be the exact same shirt worn by his mother, while the blue cop's outfit could remind of his father's outfit. So why would the mom cop want to keep Alex from the crotch-grabbing ways of the all-green Mr. Deltoid? I wish we had time to cover every color combination in the film, but I'm actually not 100% I'm reading the signs right. My gut says that the connections between Alex's parents and the other non-binary folk means that one or both of them is gay, and because society made them too afraid to live their truth, they'll let Alex get away with anything, so long as he conforms to this one societal standard. In which case, Alex's faux bisexuality might be yet another torture mechanism, threatening his parents with a betrayal he wouldn't perform, even when
deprived of the society of women.
The common color among the homonormative figures is green. So we should notice that when conspirator Rubinstein is seen up close, what seemed like a black and white outfit is actually white and very dark green. She and her partner, conspirator Dolan, share names with two famous ballet dancers of the 20th century, Ida Rubinstein and Anton Dolan. Among Rubinstein's great accomplishments was commissioning the gender-bending role of Saint Sebastian for herself. But she also played Cleopatra, who bears a certain lineage with Alexander the Great, and Scheherazade, which is the name of the song playing when Alex is eating grapes with the many-colored harem girls. We really don't get the sense that Alex is lying to himself when we see his fantasies of whipping Jesus up Mount Golgotha, or slaughtering enemies on the battlefield, or being mothered by this trinity of lovely ladies. Alex's wildest fantasies do suggest an authentic heterosexuality, though he does fight for the green team. Like I said, it's complicated. Either way, this conspiracy of many colors would like to bring him down, with a wine called Saint Estèphe, named for Saint Stephen, whose story is notable for its many parallels to Jesus's. For some, his feast day is even the same as Jesus' birthday, which is when some celebrate the adoration of the Magi, when the three kings came for the birth of Christ, and the three kings is the other name people use for Orion's belt. So that would likely be our link to the stars here. What about the Great Pyramid? Well, the alignment occurs at these time codes, the common element being a jumble of 117. The Great Pyramid is 280 by 440 royal cubits. That's a ratio of 11 by 7. Dividing 11 by 7 gives an approximation of half of pi. Similarly, the height by the base perimeter gives a ratio of 44 by 7, which divides to almost 2 pi, 2 pi being the way we find the full 360 degrees of a perfect circle. A bisection of the Great Pyramid is equally close to making a golden triangle, while 280 and 220 reduced to 22 by 7, which was exactly how Archimedes thought one could approximate pi. In other words, the Great Pyramid of Giza may have been constructed to demonstrate three things ancient people were aware of: the area of a circle, the golden ratio, and the movement of the stars. Indeed, though the alignment occurs at 1701, the shot ends at 1702, which is 1022 seconds, which is the exact number of stars ancient people believed were moving around in the sky. Finding all this helped me realize that Kubrick may have had these concerns in mind when he shot Dr. Strangelove, since the world-ending bomb hits the dirt at 7:44 of the front side and 1:27:22 of the back side, a combination of a perfect circle and a golden triangle. Why would a perfect circle be the thing that's killing Alex in A Clockwork Orange? Well, as Alex is jumping to his doom, his opposite self is passing this poster for the Middle-earth Club, which even features the elvish writing that appears on the One Ring. You may know that John Lennon approached Kubrick in 1969 to make a film of Tolkien's novel featuring himself as Gollum. But you may not know that the man slapping Alex's face here was the voice of John Lennon in Yellow Submarine, or how Mr. Deltoid's brother Wolfe Morris voiced Gollum in the 1968 radio version.
So then we does what it wants, eh? We shows it the way out, yes.
Awake at last, yes? I met your mother on the way to work, yes?
That's how I came to realize that A Clockwork Orange is most likely shot according to the golden ratios found inside a perfect circle, which I'd long since been using to decode the life of Barry Lyndon. Clockwork begins inside the Tolkien-loving Korova milk bar, with Alex's eyes being perfectly encased and perfectly bisected by the first 5 stages of the spiral. Just as the Great Pyramid complex features 2 pyramids encased by Phi, while the third is bisected. Now, we all know that the One Ring must be destroyed, and is only destroyed, in the end, by accident. But what is Alex's One Ring? And can it be destroyed? Rather, what seems to set A Clockwork Orange somewhat apart from Barry Lyndon is visuals whose complexity frequently extends beyond the One Ring into a 3-ring scenario, often making for a very useful way of breaking up those rainbow groupings, whether it's Alex versus the rainbow or the rainbow versus him. 3 perfect circles, like 3 stars, which people as far back as Pythagoras regarded as spheres, like the Earth. So, to crack the ancient riddle of pi was to understand why God or the gods set up the universe the way they did. The Egyptian god associated with Orion's belt was Sa, who was eventually conflated with Osiris, the god of death and rebirth, and the father of Horus. Ancient Egyptians regarded the pharaoh as the living embodiment of Horus, and when he or she died, their souls would make the skyward journey back to the Orion constellation, back to their father, Osiris. Alexander the Great was the pharaoh of Egypt, as was Cleopatra. And maybe that's why this rainbow plot ultimately fails, because each dead Horus simply invites the next Horus to fill their shoes. The cycle has to be broken, the ring destroyed, or else the circle game continues. And you can't break a cycle with more of the same. If Alex's cycle is binary and the rainbow rejects him, where is he supposed to turn? This brings us to a final bit of Ludovico technique, which was tucked away for anyone who'd seen a film called My Lover, My Son, that came out the year before, based on the 1952 novel Reputation for a Song. It takes place mainly inside Alex's suicide house, even revealing the fact that Frank's revenge hall always had that giant pool table and the Mother Mary art.
I want to know something. Do you always walk into your mother's bedroom like that?
I don't know what you mean.
Do you always walk into your mother's bedroom like that?
The story is basically Hamlet with a happy ending, which means it also has a lot in common with the myth of Horus, his dead father Osiris, and his mother Isis, who marries his evil uncle, Set.
If you understand my meaning.
If I do, it's very insulting to my mother.
Do you think that I would insult your mother?
I think you'd insult God.
In each telling, the son blames the mother for his state of being.
Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended.
Mother, you have my father much offended.
Lord Bullingdon, you have insulted your father.
Madam, you have insulted my father.
And that her rescue depends upon the son's ability to rise to the quality of his true father. But what if the mother doesn't want to be rescued?
From the way I love this child, my lord, you ought to know I would have loved his elder brother, had he proved worthy of any mother's affection.
Or can't be rescued? Because to truly rescue the secretly lesbian Mrs. DeLarge might mean Alex would have to think of a way to make society as a whole accepting of the non-binary. In other words, to make a society in which Alex himself would never have been produced. How can you destroy the ring when the ring is you?
To be or not to be? That is the question.
You know, what I really wish I could do is just play the whole thing through, sit here and watch it with you. I think it would speak for itself. But a promise to Kubrick's ghost is a promise to Kubrick's ghost, so we'll do the next best thing. I know many of you will never take the trouble to make your own mirrorform versions of these films, and since the mirror cat is out of the mirror bag, I'd hate to pass up our chance for at least a surface-level review. The film begins and ends with the song Thus Spoke Zarathustra, so that means we've got one copy of the song playing one way, and the other playing the other way, right on top of each other. Thanks to the Mirrorform, the one ends with the Star Child staring at the audience, and the other ends with the Star Child staring up at the sky. What follows probably won't surprise you. Dave Bowman's entire 20-odd minute Space Odyssey, from the start of the light show to his 4 transformations into becoming the Star Child, flows smoothly along with the Dawn of Sapiens sequence. The light show actually ends the moment we meet Dr. Floyd. There's a lot of neat little notes here on both sides about food and drink, or how we get this giant eye along with all that screaming, but we can skip to Moonwatcher screaming his triumph over the rival hominids, at which point we blast into the light show, the pure electric joy of knowing that life is about to get a lot better for those with the power to control the pool, because they have the murder tool. The bone throw pairs with the last of Bowman's frozen scream faces, and the second last pairs with the leap into the future, at which point the light show that was totally horizontal goes vertical, leading to one of my very favorite mirror moments in the entire Kubrick canon of sound and reverse image waltzing gloriously together. From here on out, the segmentation gets a lot simpler, in a way. The entire sequence with Dr. Heywood Floyd matches up perfectly with the section about Hal's plot to kill Frank Poole and Dave's revenge murder on Hal. The intermission happens right as Floyd is touching the monolith, as if the created darkness represents the hideous screaming triggered by the touch. This scream is the transmission to Jupiter that Floyd is talking about in the video that Hal's death generates, a video that comes right at the other side of this sequence. So the Mirrorform encases all of Floyd's scenes into this middle section, ending with the Mirrorform's shattering transmission to Jupiter, and beginning with Floyd being followed around by a giant Jupiter, the king of the gods.
We haven't seen you up here for a long time.
No, very nice to see you again.
That means that we meet Dave and Frank in a section that circles back completely upon itself, the middle of which is them seeming to climb in, then out of this spinning tube. So this means that the first half is us meeting the crew and Hal performing his secretive psychology tests on Frank and Dave, and it's when Dave lets Hal know he knows Hal is being so secretive that Hal either makes up this problem to distract Dave or makes a genuine error. And that's what the back half of the middle section investigates. Is the AE-35 malfunctioning in a way that Dave can't tell? Or was Hal wrong? Or being tricky? Ending on the botched conspiracy. And speaking of conspiracies, I think it's fair to draw your attention to the meaning behind the song playing opposite that fiendish lip reading. It's called Gayane Ballet Suite Adagio by Autumn Gachaturian. It signifies a part of the ballet where the lovely Gayane dances mournfully about being married to an alcoholic, who will soon be conspiring with some smuggler friends of his. A major theme of the ballet is Gayane's angst about the lazy criminals she's with, and the hard-working military man she dreams about. Since, again, this is The Shining's opposite number, it's interesting that 2001 would have this subtle work and play angle. In fact, there's this one crazy cool overlay where Dave's work seems to have him in a vortex caused by the chess game happening on the other side. But is Hal even capable of play? Really? All right. If I've made it seem like I'm scratching past the surface, you must realize by now there is a deep end to this little pool. And it's yours to discover. Should you choose to do so, should you choose to ruin the Mona Lisa for yourself, I hope you'll allow others to make that choice for themselves. And now, let's turn to what they really don't want you to know. I'll have to move faster through this than I'd like, but I also know that many of you get antsy when I delve into Kubrick's number games. Unfortunately, number games are what Dr. Strangelove is all about.
Designating new target 384.
It was directed to the 843rd Bomb Wing on airborne alert.
As for structure, the film only has 4 locations and may only take place across the same 1 hour, 34 minutes, and 10 seconds as the film. Each scene is about either trying to start or stop the apocalypse from happening, so there isn't the same opportunity here for high contrast mirrorformity in terms of location, character, or spans of time. What we've seen so far is how the contrast could be coming from mathematical concepts like 2π and the golden ratio. So I was struck when I noticed that the transition between the opening shot of Russia and the first shot of the bomber planes was at 1 minute 14 seconds, while the first shot of Miss Scott in Buck's bedroom is at 11:40.
Major Kong, I know you think this is crazy, but I just got a message from base over the CRM 114.
The first shot of Burleson Air Force Base is at 3:09, which is something we're not quite ready for. So for now, just know that the entire Mandrake storyline occurs across 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 7 seconds, another half-pi ratio, if you will, while the film's entire length is a jumble of pi. The first shot of the Pentagon is at 24 minutes 14 seconds, which is a more on-the-nose spelling of the silver ratio. Pentagons happen to be innately golden ratio. Octagons, like the one holding up the circle of light in the war room, are innately silver ratio, which reminded me of how Victor Ziegler's mansion has all those 5- and 8-sided star wreaths hanging around. We'll come back to that. Jack gives himself the Adolf Hitler treatment at 61:16, and we hear his body slumping to the ground up until 61:18, A jumble of the golden ratio, yes, but somehow that made me notice something about the way people say the Russian ambassador's name.
Alexei, please, I beg you.
I don't have a phone.
It's a homophone of the Roman numerals for 61, LXI, which is the 18th prime number. Coincidence? Maybe, but Alexei appears at 3628, a perfect circle jumble, exactly 2 minutes and 37 mirrorform seconds away from Ripper's fatal shot. With that in mind, remember how...
Apparently, the 23rd Airborne Division is stationed 7 miles away at Alvarado.
We recall the connection between Alvarado and the Lost City of Gold, but we may have forgotten the relationship between 237s and Fibonacci, taught to us by The Shining, which is that the golden ratio of a minute cuts it at the 23 by 37 second moment. Well, this 237 gang arrive at 3826, a backward 2-pi jumble. Ripper's force is the 843rd bomb wing, which happens to be the 15th Lucas number, a series where each number is 2 Fibonacci numbers added together. In this case, 233 and 610, 610 being the sum of 233 and 377. Lucas numbers also approach the golden ratio. So it's a bit like we have two sides of the same coin duking it out, two approaches to reaching the same conclusion. Perhaps that's why a man named Goldie refers to Ripper's order as
Plan R. R for Romeo.
Miss Scott shouts out
Plan R
for the first time at 1305, which looks like the code that was decoded, and which is itself 785 seconds, which happens to be 1/4 of pi. Shakespeare's play was 3,286 lines long, another perfect circle jumble. Romeo's friend Mercutio limps away to die from his wounds right before 1616, and Romeo first comments on his friend's death at 1618. He takes his mortal revenge on Tybalt at the exact middle of the play, while Romeo's other best friend, Benvolio, intimates his death at the opposite line from where Mercutio takes his mortal blow. If we take the simpler view of pi, being 3.14, the next death is Paris at 3014.
I'm slain.
While 3140 marks the irreversible suicides of our star-crossed lovers. So it would seem that the epic, ancient rivalry of Montagues and Capulets is marked by more of this pi meets fee business. The mutual heartbreak of their pointless warring brings them together in the end, and these rivals are able to put aside their strife and get on to the business of creating a lasting peace. So Ripper's suicide at 6118 seems like a nod to the futility of his plot. He thought he could wipe communism off the face of the earth, and ended up getting one of their best men inside the most protected room.
I don't know exactly how to put this, sir, but are you aware of what a serious breach of security that would be? I mean, you'll see everything. You'll see the big board.
And we will see that Buck has that Miss Scott Playboy King Kong was reading earlier. So not only communists, but even icky girls are breaching the war room.
I told you never to call me here. Don't you know where I am?
The structure of Dr. Strangelove is less about giant leaps through space and time, and more about passing through ratios gold and silver, perfect circles, half circles, and whatever 114s mean. I promise we'll get there, but before we get away from pi, let me note a strange connection this makes with Barry Lyndon. For the longest time, I couldn't make sense of the two amounts we see on Honoria's checks, but the 80-50 amount, taken as seconds, directs us to 134.10, just like the length of Strangelove, and where opposite Barry is giving his uncle the kiss of death.
I've only 100 guineas left to give you, for I lost the rest at cards last night. Kiss me, my boy, for we'll never meet again.
And if we think of that 100 guineas as 1 minute, that's what we need to add to 4581 to make 4641 a number very similar to the one that marks the activation of the Doomsday Machine. In fact, 4641 is how you spell mandrake in Hebrew, since all Hebrew words have innate number values, like so.
I shouldn't tell you this, Mandrake, but you're a good officer and you have a right to know.
So if we think not of 13410, but rather 13410, this is 5,650 seconds, at which point we happen to land on shot 464 of Barry Lyndon. It just so happens that 464 is how one spells the name David, as in King David, or the name of two of Kubrick's lead characters, yes. While Eyes Wide Shut has this 1565 number, which appears to be a slight misspelling of the Abrahamic name of God, Yahweh, which is spelled 10565.
Oh, yes. I can't quite see what you're getting at, Jack.
To be clear, only David's name has that incidental connection to an imprecise ratio for determining a perfect circle. The name of God has to be manipulated to arrive at a half-circle jumble. But yeah, the manipulation appears to be in service of creating a father-son dynamic between these numbers. What's more, Barry Lyndon is 10,816 seconds from the start of the first shot to the end of the last shot, so we actually have a 10,565 moment, which is 176 minutes and 5 seconds. If the reason this kiss looks so passionate is that Barry and Lyshon spent 4 years together, then it could be that Barry first became a father in the same year that he met his own ultimate father figure. And if you're wondering about 10464, this would make 17424, which at least contains the year my theory supposes Barry to have become his own father's son. How fitting that these father-son numbers would fund the reunion of Barry with not one, but two of his departed children, aged 9 and 24 in 1789. Might that be a 3-pi jumble? Because the three kings are reunited. But also, doesn't 8050 seem to highlight an 8 and a 5? It turns out that Ziegler's 8-pointed wreath does a pretty good job of replicating the Star of Ishtar, while the 5 or 10-pointed wreath contains the Star of Sopdet. Ishtar was the Mesopotamian goddess associated to Venus, just as the Egyptian goddess Sopdet's child was associated to Venus. So I've taken to thinking of these as the mother-daughter stars. To recap, that's a father associated to pi, a son associated to 2-pi, a mother associated to the golden ratio, and a daughter associated to the silver ratio. Whatever this pi meets phi business means, Kubrick saw how it could bring families together and blow them apart. Maybe it has something to do with golden circle composition, which bears a striking resemblance to a certain shape appearing throughout the Kubrick canon, a shape that looks just like the final Hebrew letter Tate, which some interpret to symbolize the potential for good or evil. That seems like a ring that could not be destroyed. But if it were destroyed, if we lost our concept of the knowledge of good and evil, wouldn't we get ourselves back to the garden?
And what will you do with the big, big, big money? Have you not everything you need? If you need a motor car, you pluck it from the trees. If you need pretty Polly, you take it.
Brother, you think and talk sometimes like a little child.
A little child, yeah.
So that's everything I want to say about the film's structure for now, but there's some great moments of Mirrorform overlay I'd hate to overlook, like how the opening Columbia logo and end logo combine to form a mushroom cloud made of words. Or my obvious favorite, where Buck reads Ripper's insane rambling.
In peace and freedom from fear, and in true health through the purity and essence of our natural fluids.
Opposite the zoom on an acrostic containing the words that help Mandrake crack the code.
And he hung up. We're still trying to figure out the meaning of that last phrase, sir.
There's nothing to figure out, General Turgidson. This man is obviously a psychotic.
Well, I'd like to hold off judgment on a thing like that, sir, until all the facts are in.
Notice how the code that might have saved the world, OPE, is the 15th, 16th, and 5th letter of the Roman alphabet. Another 1565 jumble? Maybe it takes a son to crack a father's code.
Those boys were like my children, Mandrake. Now they let me down.
No, Jack, not a bit of it. No, I'm sure they all gave it their very best. And I'm equally sure they all died thinking of you. Every man Jack of them. Jack.
And finally, there's two things worth pointing out that connect us to our final film, Lolita. The very obvious thing is how that film contains Peter Sellers as one man, revealed to be three personas, and this film features him playing three characters who can't be the same man. But the less obvious connection is this. When Mandrake cracks Ripper's code, he gives the government a three-letter grouping that could be 6 different jumbles, right? But before he solves this code, Buck Turgidson points out,
Now, in order to prevent the enemy from issuing fake or confusing orders, CRM 114 is designed not to receive at all, unless the message is preceded by the correct three-letter code group prefix.
with 26 letter possibilities per space, allowing for doubles, you're looking at 26 by 26 by 26, which equals 17576. Which is almost the license plate on the car that Humbert drives around. While his other plate, 2197, is 13 times 13 times 13, a good number for encrypting with half the Roman alphabet. But yes, 17459 is 17576 minus 117, the half-pi ratio. But also in The Shining, it's a number that was associated to the Tower of Babel. As I noted in Ice Cream, Babel is known to derive from the Hebrew word Baalal, meaning to jumble or to confuse. Mandrake is the one who makes sense of Strangelove's confusion. But what does the Tower of Babel have to do with Lolita? Maybe something to do with the middle second of its mirror form being 11733, and maybe something to do with Quilty right before the film's middle saying,
Yeah, she's a yellow belt, I'm a green belt. That's the way nature made it.
Which are the 7th and 11th belts in the American system. What it almost certainly has to do with is a biblical figure named Semiramis, who is widely understood to be a queen of ancient Assyria, who is sometimes compared to the goddess Astarte, who appears in a painting that likes to move around in eyes wide shut. Astarte also appears in that poem by the divine Edgar, though Humbert skips the line.
Afraid somebody's gonna steal your ideas and sell them to Hollywood, huh?
Some practitioners of the faith consider her to be the wife of Nimrod, the Babylonian king who commissioned the building of that famous tower. And who should Lolita's helper be in the Hunted Enchanters play?
I stand before you, a rearsome bucky goat no more. Tremble not, little nymph, you see before you a weary goat. The bewitcher is bewitched.
Look, Semiramis, look. Yes, the goat removeth his horns. Let us take him to the Dark Kingdom. Yes, to the Dark Kingdom. Away! Away!
In fact, on the other side of the Mirrorform, Charlotte has a book beside her called Outrageous Queen, a biography of Christina of Sweden, who was also known as the Semiramis of the North.
It was a stroke of genius on Mama's part. Ain't I clever?
The time codes for low-speaking Semiramis are 11107 and 2638 seconds. More pi business, and what could be a warped version of Genesis 11:7. But maybe it's also to do with the fact that these two numbers are quite close to the 23rd Fibonacci number, 17,711. In fact, the difference between that number and the Strangelove number is 135, which we just saw to be a rather apocalyptic number. And the difference between that and the Lolita number is 252, which is 10 digits off from Lolita's most recurring number, 242, the address for the Hayes home, and for the hotel room where Humbert and Lowe spend the middle of the movie together.
You're crazy.
In fact, these 242s give us the best way of viewing the structure of Lolita, broken up only by 629s, which we'll come back to later. The seemingly identical first and last scenes harmonize at 242. I say seemingly because Quilty is holding up a wine bottle with his head in the first version and not in the final version. Where'd he go?
Have you been here? How did you get in?
Well, your little daughter opens the door to me on the way to her piano lesson, and she said I was to wait in here until your arrival. And so here I am.
Sit down, make yourself at home.
Set in the dark so as to save you the expense of the electricity.
That is very considerate of you.
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
They can't escape 242, any more than they can keep Claire Quilty from somehow being the author of her school play, 4 States Over, or from generally following Lowe and Hum wherever they go. What 242 signifies is better indicated by what 252 seems to signify 10 digits over. 10 happens to be one of the top 2 or 3 numbers of significance in Eyes Wide Shut, and that is the opposite film in the canon. In fact, the one is exactly 10 seconds longer than the other, which gave me the idea to run them over top each other and see what happens.
All right, now tell me, what have you been doing these afternoons?
You really want to know?
Yes, I do. I really want to know.
All right, I'm going to tell you the real truth of what I've been doing. I've been going to extra rehearsals.
That's the most fatuous lie you could possibly think up.
Now, Lowe and Hum arrive at the Enchanted Hunters Hotel, which happens to be hosting the state police convention a few seconds after Bill enters Somerton and becomes part of the great ritual.
Hello, Mr. Swine.
Hello, Mr. Quilty. Good evening, man. Well, did you get any good pictures today?
Yeah, great. I'm having a swell vacation.
Good.
Mr. Swine, do you mind if I ask you a sort of personal question?
Sure, go ahead.
What is a guy like you doing in a job like this?
What do you mean?
Well, you just don't seem to be the type.
Well, as a matter of fact, I was an actor.
I know it. Didn't I say to you? When I first saw you, there's something about your sort of aura that all actors and actresses have.
Well, since you're a playwright, maybe you could use me sometime, huh?
Yeah, maybe I could use you sometime.
And they enter room 242, 37 seconds before the mirrorform middle of Eyes Wide Shut, revealing 2 paintings. The one above the bed, so far as I can tell, is just one of these imitation paintings from British film history, this one appearing in the Edgar Wallace series, The Four Just Men, in an episode called The Deserter. Do not ask how long I've spent figuring this out. Edgar Wallace being the guy who wrote King Kong, as in Major King Kong, as in that guy who triggers Doomsday at the exact moment of his story that a white rabbit explodes Crazy Earl in his story. It's true, I don't know this to be a fake painting. It's certainly in the style of Jan Bruegel, the son of Pieter Bruegel, who painted that Tower of Babel piece in The Shining. It most reminds me of his works depicting the Garden of Eden, and a few I've seen of Orpheus charming the animals. This could be wrong, so take this with a grain of salt, but if it is Eden, this might help explain our 252, since at 522 seconds into the film, Quilty reads a letter by Humbert which goes,
When I stood Adam naked, Adam naked, you should be ashamed of yourself, Captain.
And the 25th verse of Genesis 2 goes, Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame.
We are not rich, and while we travel, we shall be obliged. We shall be thrown a good deal together. Two people sharing one room inevitably enter into kind of, how shall I say, kind of...
This may mean room 242 is in reference to the preceding line about how that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh.
That's enough. Say, what'd you take it away for, mister? That's getting kind of smutty there.
That would make this a nuptial bed of sorts. But that's why I find the Orpheus possibility equally compelling. To make a complex matter very simple, Bill Harford's office is covered front to back in the works of August Macke, a German expressionist painter whose style was deeply informed by the advent of the art movement known as Orphism, named for Orpheus, born out of a group of painters who called themselves Section d'Or, which is the French way of saying the golden section or golden ratio. Now, Orpheus is best known for joining Jason to find the Golden Fleece, and it was on this quest that Orpheus's glorious art, his music, overpowered the alluring siren songs tempting them to shipwreck. But he's also known for the time when his love, Eurydice, is chased into a nest of vipers by a would-be rapist satyr, where she's bitten and dies. Orpheus then descends into the underworld to save her, and does convince Hades and Persephone to let Eurydice return with him, but is instructed not to look back until they've reached the land of the living. Orpheus almost makes it, but when they get there, he can't help himself, and looks back before she's all the way out of the land of shadow herself, and so must watch as she fades into darkness a second time, this time forever.
We seem to be going the same way. I'm just about to give you a policy medicine.
Humbert's story at this point is basically the sadistic version. The real death of his real wife, the result of him thinking she would send Lolita away forever, has opened the door to his own Orphic rescue mission. Only the truer, deeper grief in both films is not felt by the character we expect. So, who would the Orpheus be in these scenarios? Who truly was Adam naked? Has paradise been lost? Or just its shadow? Moving away from folks who shouldn't have had navels, the other painting in room 242 is called Basket of Flowers by a man with the delightful name of Girard van Spandunk. He was a court painter of King Louis XVI, and later nobleman of none other than that most fearsome naval officer of all time, Napoleon Bonaparte. And Home 242 includes this painting of a flower known as Napoleon's hat. So we can consider what it means that Ziegler has a model ship in his pool room named after that most fearsome of naval officers, and we can consider the works of Albert Williams, who is admittedly inspired by Van Spandunk, and whose works adorn the walls of the Hotel Jason. When he tries to get Lo away from that old life, he moves her into a house that looks like a cubist reimagining of their New Hampshire home, reminding of how Bill can't seem to stop walking down the same 3 streets over and over. Perhaps because certain things just can't be escaped. Humbert can't escape that Lo is a growing, evolving being, her nymphette perfection a fading memory before she's even out of her teens. And Bill can't change that there are forces in the universe that were always beyond his control, understanding, and perception. He knew how not to be a complete Humbert, or even a
Humbert Salus.
But this didn't save him from falling into his evolved version of Humbert's identity crisis.
What's a big fat hurry anyway?
There's been a car following us which we have been trying to lose.
What?
However, I haven't seen it for the past quarter of an hour. I think we have lost it.
Really?
I didn't want to scare you, but this car has been following us for the past 3 days, and yesterday it was parked outside the motel.
This artistic chain between two films separated by 37 years, a chain formed by real artists separated by a century, shows how, for all the progress we hope to see between generations, or even within an artist's body of work, the struggles of our current, evolved society are not so different from the struggles of generations past. Another name for Orphism is Orphic Cubism, that movement of Pablo Picasso's to break up and reassemble the form of a thing, thus allowing for multiple perspectives to exist on a single subject. So perhaps the most obvious example of Kubrick presenting us with a cubist riddle is in the CRM 114 of Dr. Strangelove becoming the Serum 114 of A Clockwork Orange, or the 114 pin among Hartman's military ribbons, pinned right above the Republic of Vietnam campaign medal. In fact, there's what we might call a super jumble of this code buried across all the films, which I may one day make a video about, but for now, let me just tell you what I think this code means. Cracking it took a keen insight from theorist Julie Kearns, who noticed how in shot 412 of Lolita, Lo impersonates a harem girl, a word that derives from the ancient Hebrew haram, a word meaning chosen for destruction. But she overlooked three key things. In shot 411, Hum and Lo start being followed by a Chevy 210. The Hebrew word MRC means to make someone sick, which is the curious effect this car has on both Lo and Hum. And Hebrew letters are intrinsically associated to a certain set of numbers, as we just saw. 411, MRC. And as it chases them through the countryside with 117 shots left in the film, Lo puts on a wool sweater, wool being CMR in Hebrew. And the only other CRM jumble we could make in biblical Hebrew is MCR, meaning pain or distress.
Oh, don't try to be clever, please. There's a terrific pain in my arm.
Really?
I don't know what I did to it.
All these jumbles of CRM involve letters that add up to 330, which just so happens to be next-door neighbors with 210 on a thing we call Pascal's triangle, a set of numbers we've been studying since at least the 11th century days of Chinese mathematician Jia Xian.
What happened to this oriental-minded genius?
Look, don't make fun of me. I don't have to tell you a blasted thing.
Each number is known by a certain position number, and in the case of 330, this is the fourth digit of row 11. 330 is 114. Right after the 210 appears, Humbert spies Lo talking to a car marked 4304, and 4304 is 2584 seconds, the 18th Fibonacci number. If you cut into the side of Pascal's triangle like so, the diagonals happen to reveal the Fibonacci sequence, and it happens to be 2584 that cuts right between 210 and 330. And did you notice that 210 seconds is 3 minutes 30 seconds, or how the golden ratio of 210 seconds is 130 seconds, aka 210? Actually, remember how the Miss Scott scene starts at 11:40? Well, as it does so, this little clock shows it being around 3:07 or 3:08 in the morning.
It's 3 o'clock in the morning.
The Air Force never sleeps.
If the film is told in real time, which is not impossible, Ripper's suicide occurs either 22 minutes 10 seconds or 49 minutes 36 seconds later, depending on which side of the Mirrorform we're on. Which means he likely kills himself at 3:57 a.m., or the 237th minute of the morning, across from 3:30 a.m., the 210th minute.
We are rapidly approaching a moment of truth, both for ourselves as human beings and for the life of our nation. Now, truth is not always a pleasant thing.
In Eyes Wide Shut, Bill enters the morgue room of Sea Wing and gazes over Amanda Curran's corpse for 114 seconds, starting at 2:08:06 and ending at 2:10. And by the way, 286 is another number on the triangle at the nexus of the 11th and 4th diagonals. Another thing to note about the triangle is how the sum of each row lists off the powers of 2. So the row with 210 in it signifies 2 to the power of 10. And thanks to Leibniz, we know that powers of 2, expressed as binary, give us the powers of 10. So row 10 is also 10 to the power of 10. 2 tens. In fact, I've come to wonder if this is why Lowe makes this odd remark on the 210th page from the start of Nabokov's novel.
Hey, look, all the 9s changed to the next column.
Now, she could be referring to 10 to the power of 5, that row with 2 10s in it, but more likely, she's noticing 10 to the power of 4, which would associate to a row that goes 1 4 6 4 1, a row containing the Hebrew for mandrake and David. And since each row also tells us the powers of 11, like so, she would be pointing out 11 to the power of 4. And isn't it a broken CRM 114 that allows the world to end at 464 seconds? We can also notice that 210 is in the 6th spot of row 10, while the one in the 4th spot is part of a diagonal that adds to the Fibonacci number 610. And 610 seconds is 10 minutes 10 seconds, 2 tens. 210 is also one of the few numbers on Pascal's triangle to appear twice, in the 2nd and 19th positions of row 21. These appear in the 3rd diagonal of the triangle, which happens to have an innate and continuous relationship to pi, as shown by this formula. And don't we get a big face full of 1921 in shot 565 of The Shining? I know some people find this business of number and letter jumbles freaky, but I wanted to hammer home what I think Kubrick's point is here. Cubism isn't limited to art. It's a feature of the natural world. And isn't that what art is always doing, trying to assign significance to the jumbling symbols and concepts and experiences we have of life? Sure, some artists only seem great within their lifetimes, but others achieve a kind of timelessness, don't they? Might part of that formula be the ability to make one's art inseparable from some other, unchanging, universal truth about life? Such that when any person from any era encounters that art, it can't help but resonate. One thing that does seem to be changing is society's patience with men pursuing much younger women. It's believed that the novel was partly inspired by Charlie Chaplin's scandalous marriage to his second wife, the then pregnant 16-year-old Lita Gray, when Chaplin was 35. Not quite as bad as the 1451 differential between these two, but not great. So perhaps this low, and Lita business is meant as a comment on whatever this Peter Pan and
Wendy, darling,
quality is that makes certain men and certain women incapable of realizing that these underage figures will grow up and might end up not so unlike the older versions they can't abide.
Humbert, try to think of your poor little Lolita, all alone in the world. You must live for her sake.
Right across from the appearance of that 210 car, we get our best look at Mantovani's film Encores, which contains the theme from Limelight, written by Chaplin, for a film about an aging comedian rejecting the advances of a fawning young damsel.
Vero, look, I'm walking. I'm walking. I'm walking. I'm walking.
Monsieur! I can walk!
The film's release in America was stymied by the Red Scare epidemic, not because Chaplin may have been trying to whitewash his lascivious history, but because of his communist sympathies.
I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids,
But we've come a long way since then. Haven't we? Let's ask the background art.
I see that you're interested in art. In that case, you really must see the collection of reproductions I have in my bedroom. Voila.
Oh, yes, that's...
Dufy.
That's right.
And there's my little Van Gogh. Monet.
Charlotte's help speeds up our search, and we realize that right outside Lowe's bedroom is Raoul Dufy's depiction of a street festival on July 14th, the French day of celebration known as Bastille Day. This was a day in 1789 where the fortress and political prison known as Bastille was stormed by the common folk, sparking the start of the French Revolution and marking the beginning of the end for the French monarchy.
Perhaps if you let me have your telephone number, that would give me a chance to think it over.
1776.
1776. Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, so easy to remember.
Bastille Day also appears as Lowe is being sent away to Camp Climax, while opposite side Dr. Zempf is proposing a complete break with the former way of looking at things.
Perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps there is another approach that we can take. Something new altogether. Something new, some new approach.
And then it appears as Lowe brings his lunch, and opposite side Hum is suggesting they abandon these new lives of theirs.
There's nothing to keep us here. We haven't any obligations here. We don't owe rent to anybody. We could just pack up our bags. Tonight, we could go now.
But can they ever escape Lowe's interest in boys her own age?
I suppose that Roy has a part in this production?
Roy? What's he got to do with this?
Roy and Rex, naturally, I suppose they're in it, huh?
Well, how do I know? I only met them yesterday.
Roy and Rex are both words for king in other languages. Rex is Latin, Roy is French.
I do love you, Lolita.
Driving me crazy. You won't let me do anything. You just want to keep me locked up with you in this filthy house.
Now let's return to 629. Since we've seen a 4641 turn into a mandrake, might this other half of our structural code be a reference to FBI? Why would J. Edgar Hoover's FBI be taking an interest in the Hayes family?
Oh, but listen, he doesn't know a thing about you and me, so please watch what you say. Please watch what you say. Please watch what you say.
Well, it turns out that in Chapter 33 of Part 2 of the novel, Humbert wonders if there's a just comparison to be struck between himself and real-life Frank LaSalle, who kidnapped 11-year-old Florence Horner, posing as an FBI agent to win her compliance, before taking her on a cross-country car ride. In the Mirrorform, the car drives up slowly into this Paul Cézanne painting, The Boy in the Red Vest. Since Hoover and company were instrumental limbs in the Red Scare epidemic, I suspect that's the point here. But maybe this can be read both ways. Just as Quilty is like a shadow of Humbert, it's not just some kind of special policeman that's driving Humbert to murder-suicide. It's his own impressionism-loving self. In fact, there's another Cézanne in the Hayes home, The House in the Tree, depicting the Pontoise Hermitage, which is considered one of the capital cities where Impressionism originated. What Greenwich Village was for folk music in the 1960s, Pontoise was for
Dufy. And there's my little Van Gogh. Monet.
Humbert has come to the right place for the sort of sexual odyssey he's looking for. But a boy in a red vest is going to unsettle his pedophilic self-assurance. A boy flanked by 2 Degas paintings of 19th century teenage ballerinas who, if you were unaware, were bid on for sex work by the wealthy and powerful male audience of the day.
Gee, I'm really winning here. I'm really winning. I hope I don't get overcome with power.
Degas was aware of this tradition and baked sinister figures into what appeared to be simple depictions of innocent beauty. Kubrick's trick was the opposite, focusing us on someone we know to be sinister in order to show the mirror in our minds something deeper, something darker, something we might not otherwise want to face.
Are you Quilty?
No, I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
And I suppose that Roy has a part in this production?
Roy? What's he got to do with this?
Roy and Rex, naturally, I suppose they're in it, huh?
Well, how do I know? I only met them yesterday.
Listen, Bill, I don't think you realize what kind of trouble you were in last night. Who do you think those people were? Those were not just ordinary people there. If I told you their names, I'm not going to tell you their names, but if I did, I don't think you'd sleep so well.
And so, with the help of a clean tashtuk, the red Kruvy soon stopped, and it did not take long to quieten the two wounded soldiers down in the snug of the Duke of New York. Now they knew who was master and leader. Sheep, thought I, but a real leader knows always when like to give and show generous to his unders.
Well, now we're back to where we were. Yes?
I'm an Englishman, I am.
Just like before and all forgotten? Right.
And a man of property.
Right.
He wants to step into my shoes.
Right.
He wants to step into my shoes.
Right.
Be careful, Mr. President. I think he's drunk.
Now then, Dmitri, you know how we've always talked about the possibility of something going wrong with the bomb. The bomb, Dmitri. The hydrogen bomb.
My girls, they didn't care for the Overlook at first. One of them actually stole a pack of matches and tried to burn it down. But I corrected them, sir. And when my wife tried to prevent me from doing my duty, I corrected her.
Bill, I have seen one or two things in my life, but never anything like this.
Great party, isn't it?
Oh, that's weird. That really felt like that was going to be the end. But we still have another 39 minutes. Wait, how do I know exactly how much time is left in this video if I haven't made it yet? Oh, that's right, because this is not the first version of this documentary that I ever made. The first version I made after spending only 3 months decoding the other 7 films. And it was pretty close to what you just saw, minus about 30 minutes, which brought its runtime by purest happenstance to a few seconds shy of the runtime for Full Metal Jacket. I thought that was amazing because I Scream, my Shining documentary, was consciously designed to fade to black at the exact moment that the long version of The Shining does. This is something a few clever commenters seem to notice, with only one, as of this writing, hitting the nail squarely on the head. My upcoming Eyes Wide Shut analysis was, at first, calibrated to be the same length as that film. So I thought, oh, that's cool. I'll have a kind of secret hat trick hiding in plain sight for movies 6, 7, and 8. And hey, 678 is the number of shots in A Clockwork Orange. It's all coming together, thought the Joe of July 2021. But while the significance of these numbers was not then a mystery to me, what the hell is 1:52:45? Or 1:12:45? Or 6,765 seconds?
Nothing rings a bell?
No.
So, yeah, that last one did ring a bell. It's the 21st Fibonacci number. Full Metal Jacket is a perfect golden spiral of time. The Shining is golden by the minutes, and Full Metal Jacket is golden by the seconds. And in case you think this ends with me telling you that all of Kubrick's films are golden ratio, no, not exactly. But for now, let's stick with Full Metal Jacket. The first 10 sections fall completely within the head shaving scene on one side and carving up Joker's final speech on the other side. The first section to really get my attention was section 13, at which point Hartman is saying,
"You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you. Now get up. Get on your feet."
"You will learn by the numbers I will teach you." The point would seem to be how section 14 features Hartman saying 3 right at the dividing line.
Private Pile, I'm going to give you 3 seconds. Exactly 3 fucking seconds to wipe that stupid-looking grin off your face.
And section 19 features Crazy Earl saying 1 million at the dividing line.
I will never forget this day. The day I came to Way City and fought 1 million NVA gooks.
3 million is right around the high estimate for casualties suffered as a result of the war, subtracting the roughly 300,000 U.S. and Allied forces deaths. So I suspect this was the most important number Kubrick wanted us to learn. Now, I realize that some will find it hard to believe that taking such an approach could possibly result in a flowing, coherent, normal-feeling narrative. If you are one such skeptical mind, I would like to invite you to take a look at the time codes for this video and realize that this call is coming to you from inside the spiral. This involved a lot less editing of my original script than you might imagine. Just a matter of adding and subtracting some lines and sequences. Though I couldn't shorten the Frank Butcher montage, so I just inverted it with the Mirrorform Career section. But hey, I'm not a multimillionaire with enough time to make perfection my hobby. But anyway, if they aren't all golden spirals, what are they? Well, half are and half sort of aren't. I say sort of aren't because the longest of them is 2 hours, 33 minutes, 37 seconds, which still feels like a nod to 2337, marking the golden ratio of a minute. The half that are include Barry Lyndon, which goes up to the next Fibonacci number in seconds, and Dr. Strangelove, which goes down to the next Fibonacci number in minutes. You may want to quibble with the Barry Lyndon one, which is 10,816 seconds as we saw, but with 54 seconds of opening credits and 76 seconds of end credits, we reach a moment where the end music shifts into a markedly different mood. I realize some won't want to count that, but there it is. That's what happens at 10,946 seconds.
You know when fluoridation first began?
No, I don't yet. No.
1946. 1946, Mandrake. How does that coincide with your post-war commie conspiracy?
Also, if you play Deja Vu by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young over top Barry Lyndon 5 times, I mean, I don't know why you would, but if you did, you would notice that the final play of the album cuts out at exactly 10,946 seconds. So, there's that too. The most amazing thing I've noticed for Barry Lyndon is how the dialogue for section 17 is Honoria's handmaiden reading her Les Sens by Barnabé Farmian du Rossois. The passage goes like this, translated into English. Hearts attracted to each other communicate their substance to each other, like two fiery mirrors, one to the other opposite. Concentrate the light and reflect it. The rays collected in turn, divided. As they multiply, they increase and become more beautiful. And all the more active, the more they crossed paths. At the same point, come together. And isn't that such a gorgeous distillation of both the Mirrorform and the golden ratio? Not to mention how Frontside Barry is being awarded here with 2 Frédéric d'Or, which means Golden Fredericks. That these should frame the middle section of the film is almost too perfect. Strangelove is technically almost 95 minutes, which would be 135, the code to end the world, but it's 89 minutes from the end of the opening credits to the bombs going off, so I hope we can agree that counts because it has some cool ones, like how Section 6 marks Colonel Bat Guano saying he doesn't have 55 cents.
They won't accept the call. Have you got 55 cents?
Well, you don't think I'd go into combat with loose change in my pocket, do you?
If Dr. Strangelove had been as long as The Shining, it would need a 10th golden section, which would be 55 minutes long. But it ain't, so it don't. And there's other neat stuff, like the character Goldie, who translates the order to end the world. All his dialogue there falls within the 3 minutes that make up Section 4, while his next 2 short bits of dialogue start at the 15-minute mark,
Code prefix set,
and the 65-minute mark.
All the radio gear is out, including the CRM 114.
Did Kubrick think the golden ratio was God? Because he keeps making associations between them. Indeed, that 1565 from Eyes Wide Shut directs us to timecode 2605. 265 is Domino's address, and it's part of a different kind of Fibonacci-like sequence, but for triangles, called Padovan numbers. 2605 is right across from 20806, or 7686 seconds, which is another phone number that appears in the awning of a diamond shop. A shop called 23, address 37. While 286 is the address of a spot called El Hueco Hotel, in English, the Gap Hotel. The Gap Hotel reminds of the French hotels seen in this Monet painting, while opposite Humbert and Lolita sit in Le Port Motel, which can also be thought of as the Gap Motel, since pores are gaps in the skin. We might also note how Humbert has been sitting here contemplating how someone might pull off the perfect murder of Lottie.
No man can bring about the perfect murder. Chance, however, can do it.
While opposite Lowe is weeping over Lottie's death from a freak rainstorm accident. One involving a giant white picket fence, like the one on the cover of that Mantovani album, which was right below Lowe's quill as she brings up her big problem with Lottie.
Did you have a good time dancing with Claire Quilty? Of course. He's a very erudite gentleman.
And her quill happens to run along the bottom of that 210 car as it lets loose on the other side. And Lottie's killer, Freddie Beale, happens to be the one throwing the after party that Lowe came home from early to crash Lottie's after party.
She just ran right in front of me.
And she and Freddie Beale and a couple of the other kids are having a jam session or whatever it's called.
I'm Frederick Beale Sr.
Oh.
May I talk to you for a moment?
Do, please.
My son was driving the car.
Maybe a perfect murder was pulled off after all. We just needed to close some gaps in our knowledge.
And the rest of it is right there in the paper. She was a junkie. She OD'd. There was nothing suspicious. Her door was locked from the inside. The police are happy. End of the story.
Well, I'm on my way right now. Okay, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye. What is this? It's the name of a Beethoven opera, isn't it? Nick. It's the password. The password.
Or we can observe how 1565 seconds into A Clockwork Orange is directly opposite 6515 seconds. In Frank Alexander's world, he's just beginning to recognize the dreaded Singin' in the Rain song that triggers his PTSD, while opposite Alex is blissfully able to enjoy Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. In fact, it's right at this 1565 moment that the Ninth Symphony is reaching bar number 348, a backward 843, which Strangelove associates to the end of the world, and Pascal's Triangle, and a guy who walked into a bathroom and shot himself. This section of the song is called the Turkish March.
I wouldn't care if you're maternal grandfather turned out to be a Turk. But if I ever found out that you didn't believe in God, I think I would commit suicide.
In fact, it's this exact version of the Turkish march that accompanies the Ludovico technique that scars Alex for life. Bar 348 now accompanies this shot of marching Nazis across from Chaplain Charlie saying,
Don't be shy to speak up. Remember, I know of the urges that can trouble young men deprived of the society of women.
This helped me to realize that the composition is 940 bars long, so the golden ratio would be bar 580. And shot 580 is the one where Alex admits this song makes him want to kill himself.
That's right. I can't listen to the ninth anymore at all. When I hear the ninth, I get like this funny feeling.
In fact, it's directly opposite this shot that we lose sight of Saint Sebastian for the last time at 1:56:51, or 7,011 seconds. But if Clockwork isn't one of our golden ratio movies, what is it? Naturally, the first thing I did after putting together the Full Metal Jacket part was to make a list of time codes for each film, which is how I realized the thing about Lolita and Eyes Wide Shut being just 10 seconds apart. But when you synchronize where the films actually begin, after the opening logos, they're now only 4 seconds different, allowing Alice Harford's final word to fall into the gap.
Fuck.
What unlocked the other two was that I happened to notice, right near the beginning of my top secret work on 2001, that the bone throw transition happens at the same second, 1951, as the moment when Eyes Wide Shut jumps us out of Ziegler's party and into the Harford sexy times. Somehow, just knowing that made it possible for me to reach the ultimate conclusion, which we've already touched upon. These 4 non-Fibonacci films are like stripes on a rainbow, designed to be laid atop one another for compounding significance and cross-reference. It shocked me, even after all the other surprises lurking in Kubrick's various machinations, how much doing this helps to clarify and emphasize each story's secret operations. To what extent? Well, since Eyes Wide Shut is the longest, I started with just one comparison against each other film. But having noticed the Sexy Times bone throw transition, I was struck when I saw that this moment also pairs with Lo planting her first kiss on Humbert's cheek, and the jump from Alex's night of lovely pictures to his mother coming to wake him the next morning. The painting behind Alex's mom is called The Nymph, and you might notice a certain similarity between her pose and the pose of Alice Harford in this moment. And Nymph, or Nymphette, is what Humbert calls his underage sex targets more often in the novel than the film, although...
What drives me insane is the twofold nature of this Nymphette, of every Nymphette perhaps. This mixture in my Lolita of tender, dreamy childishness and a kind of eerie vulgarity.
As for 2001, Kubrick was clever enough here to bury what makes this a nymph moment in one of the Fibonacci films. While researching the Stourhead Gardens, I learned that there's a grotto there featuring a statue called Sleeping Nymph, which is a copy of a motif from Christopher Columbus days about a legendary statue that would be found on the banks of the beautiful Danube River. And what song should we start to hear right at the leap into the future? By the beautiful blue Danube. Nymphs are simple-minded nature deities, bridging the gap between humans and the natural world. And doesn't this 1951 moment seem to mark a moment of division in each story, marking the end of some kind of blissful normality? You might be wondering if 1951 has a particular significance, and this is one where I'm not exactly sure. 1951 was an important autobiographical year for Kubrick, the year he started making films. And it's actually only 1951 in the two films I mentioned. The moment is 2001 in A Clockwork Orange's natural timeline and 1945 in Lolita's natural timeline. They only become 1951 by pinning the film's start times together. The significance of 2001 is probably obvious, but 1945 took me a while. And this is only if my hunch is correct, but I think you'll see where I'm coming from. If Humbert is thinking of himself as Adam naked, who would be his Eve, if not Lolita? The names of Adam and Eve in Hebrew add to 19 and 45. And though it's true that Lowe had already grabbed Humbert's leg while watching The Modern Prometheus, this peck on the cheek feels like a different stage of development. We might also note that 19 plus 45 is 64, which is the number of squares on a chessboard, and how, after all this thinking, Charlotte moves her queen from the G4 square to the H5 square. Humbert takes her queen with a knight from F6, meaning the reason for Charlotte to move her queen was that it was in danger from this very attack.
It had to happen sometime.
She moved her queen from one position of danger to another. Moving Lowe out of Hum's reach forever made her run in front of Freddie Beale's car and drives Hum to cross the 200 miles to Camp Climax.
How far away is this camp?
200 miles. It was a stroke of genius on Mama's part.
The address that frees Lowe from Hum for good is 720. 200 times 720 is 144,000, which is a rather significant number in numerous cultures. It's the number of minutes in 100 days, or the number of days ancient Mayans thought were in 394 years. Might this be why the length of every Kubrick film from Lolita onward, including Vivian Kubrick's Making of the Shining documentary, adds to 3 minutes and 5 seconds shy of exactly the length of a day on Earth, 1,440 minutes. And 3 hours 5 minutes happens to be the exact length of the complete Barry Lyndon, which is 11,100 seconds. Is that why 1 hour 11 minutes is exactly across from 111 minutes in the Mirrorform? At which point Reverend Samuel Runt is saying,
25 minutes past 11, milady.
That's the 84,300th second of the day, with 2,100 seconds remaining.
Shall we make this the last game, ladies?
If we break down these numbers like so, we see that 3 of our trick shot numbers were always hiding between these pillars of time. The same 3 numbers that constitute row 5 of Pascal's triangle. And if that missing 305 bugs you, recall that there was a slightly longer version of The Shining, forever lost to history. Might that missing scene have been 305? Perhaps that gives us a father, a son, and a Holy Ghost. The Nymph Transition gives us a similar mid-story narrative pin, poking through each layer of the rainbow to know we synchronized our timelines correctly. But does it matter how we overlay them? You can just slap them together, in which case the 2 shorter ones end at seemingly arbitrary moments during the final Ziegler confrontation.
I was cured, all right.
What in the hell are you talking about?
Singing in the rain. Yes. Fake.
Why would they do that?
Why? In plain words, to scare the living shit out of you. To keep you quiet about where you'd been and what you'd seen.
But one technique I found interesting is to break the connection at the middle and keep the beginning and end pinned together. This makes a 13-minute 5-second gap for 2001, starting as Bill enters Somerton and ending as he enters the interrogation ring. And a 19-minute 51 gap for Clockwork. So it would seem this number means something.
Now, get undressed.
Get undressed?
What both these gaps do is jump clear over the most nymph-packed transition Kubrick ever dreamed up for one of his protagonists. And they almost jump over the entirety of the Enchanted Hunters Hotel in Lolita. Gap Hotel, indeed. So that's how I came to see the one half of the canon as golden, and the one half as rainbow, for what I'm now calling the Golden Rainbow, where rainbow likely emphasizes the fantasy element, and golden likely emphasizes the reality. Fitting, then, how the two opposing fantasy films would be on the theme of sex, or creation, while the two opposing reality films would be about war, or destruction. At least that's how simple I thought it was, until I realized that the film Kubrick had been working on since the 1970s, AI, Artificial Intelligence, is the exact same length as 2001: A Space Odyssey. In fact, Kubrick had thought of making his boy robot picture right before a book about a different kind of super smart child appeared.
Tony, I'm scared.
This identical length, down to the second, would be an astonishing coincidence. But that said, according to Spielberg, Kubrick gave him such detailed notes about how the film was to be made that his work on it may have been more paint by numbers than we will ever realize.
The amount of information he was giving me, including shots and where the camera should go, was so extraordinarily precise and detailed that I finally called him on the phone and said, "Stanley, I can't direct this movie. These factors are crying out to me to say to you, you have to direct it. This is your movie."
Now the Nymph Transition applies to a moment of AI's Mirrorform, where David is awakening in the artificial replica of his home, where the blue fairy will finally seem to be real. And on the front side, it's a few seconds before a simple-minded David walks in on Monica in the bathroom, reading Freud on Women. The 9th section of this book is Freud's famous 1914 essay On Narcissism, an Introduction, which uses the myth of Narcissus and the nymph who loved him to make a point about human psychological development. Meanwhile, fans of the shorter 117-minute European edition of The Shining may like to know this finally motivated me to investigate the construction of that film. And what I found is that it's exactly one backward mandrake shorter than the American edition. This shorter version cuts to black at 1:57:07, but if you take out the opening 14-second Warner Brothers logo, it's only 1:56:53. So it looks like we have another father-son combo, which makes sense, doesn't it? Indeed, the scenes missing from the father version of the film are the ones that make Jack look pathetic. Unpublished writer.
I'm a writer. Teaching's been more or less a way of making ends meet.
Gone. Abusive dad.
Well, it was just one of those things, purely an accident.
Gone. Struggling alcoholic.
We don't drink. Well, then you're in luck.
Gone. Imagine my astonishment watching these two play atop each other like a couple of imperfect twins.
Has Tony ever told you anything about this place? About the Overlook Hotel?
I don't know.
Now think real hard, Doc. Think.
Maybe he showed me something.
Try to think of what it was.
Is there something bad here?
Well, you know, Doc, when something happens, it can leave a trace of itself behind.
In fact, in the father version, Halloran says shining for the first time at exactly 1945.
She called it shiny.
And so, this is what I finally realized. It isn't just the non-Golden films, but all 10, if you will, of Kubrick's post-Spartacus projects that can be synchronized by their start times and by their end times to create 88 different feature-length combination possibilities. But if one were going to make 10 films across 37 years that can all be layered atop one another, you wouldn't think it would be the last of them to operate as the baseline, right? You would think it would be the first one. Or else he would have had to know he was going to make Eyes Wide Shut back in 1962, but it said he only secured the rights to adapt the source novel in 1971, while he was finishing up the first of his middle movies. That might be inaccurate, but assuming it's true, and knowing the novel Traum Nouvelle to have been 45 years old at that point, it seems more likely that Kubrick only knew that these were going to be his subjects, and the novels came as they came. So, long story short, it occurred to me that there would likely be something pre-existing the mass mirror films that was serving as the true template, the true source code for the 4 Rainbow titles. Something that would constrain the nature of their construction the way Fibonacci constrained the others. And this would feel a lot less ridiculous to say if I was saying it at the end of my Eyes Wide Shut analysis, but it just so happens to be the first thing that came to mind. Laurence Olivier's Hamlet.
To be or not to be? That is the question.
Well, I thought it would be Hamlet, due to the significance of this painting of Ophelia appearing when and how it does.
Now, when she is having her little titty squeezed, do you think she ever has any little fantasies about what handsome Dr. Bill's Dickie might be like?
I can assure you, sex is the last thing on this fucking hypothetical woman patient's mind.
And what makes you so sure?
Olivier's version is practically the only one that existed then, and is to this day the only Shakespearean adaptation to win Best Picture at the Oscars. Why would Mr. Beethoven, Boucher, Nicholson, Nabokov, Kubrick use anything less than the greatest film of the greatest play by the greatest playwright as his model for mastering his own life in pictures?
Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended.
Mother, you have my father much offended.
Now, obviously, we don't have time to span the breathtaking breadth of everything this implies, but we can cover a few things.
Just hear me, old friend. Can you play The Murder of Gonzago?
Aye, my lord.
We'll have it tomorrow night.
Like the Nymph Transition, this marks the first moment the film pivots away from Hamlet's story into Ophelia's. Olivier heavily edited Shakespeare's original play, cutting 4,072 lines down to 1917, which has Ophelia appearing at an earlier meeting. He bumped her back so that she first appears here, though he moved Hamlet calling her a nymph closer to the 1/3 mark.
How absolute the knave is.
We must speak by the card, or equivocation will undo us.
Fans of the disowned Spartacus will appreciate how it featured Hamlet himself, acting across from his own Ophelia, Gene Simmons, whom Kubrick apparently lobbied to cast in the role. Rara Sherbergia, who plays Milic, rose to stardom by playing Hamlet in his native Yugoslavia, and the moment he emerges from apartment 1C, Olivier's Hamlet starts into the play's most famous monologue, giving Sherbergia's appearance this exhilarating sense of reverence. And just so you know, there is a door labeled 7B that looks like 2B when it's opened. And at the 1 hour 56 minute 5 second mark, it's appearing across from apartments 3 and 2. We've seen how Hamlet has that connection to the falcon god Horus, but ancient Egyptians also considered Apollo to be a manifestation of Horus, while their name for the Sphinx was Ham-em-Akhet, Horus of the horizon. So really, we've got Hamlets all over the place, including the 2 films where someone ends up wrapped in bandages head to toe. Finally, you may be wondering what's happening in Hamlet when Bill passes that Ophelia painting. In fact, it goes with the last we ever see of her, as her brother Laertes is led away from her grave by Hamlet's uncle King Claudius in order to conspire against Hamlet. And in a scene where Bill will learn of the overdose of his lost Isis, if indeed that is who lurks within this costume. The painting shows Ophelia moments before her death, which we only hear about in the play and never see. Let's listen.
There is a willow grows aslant a brook that shows his hoar leaves in the glassy stream. There with fantastic garlands did she come, of crowflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples. There on the pendant boughs, her coronet weeds clambering to hang, an envious sliver broke, when down her weedy trophies and herself fell in the weeping brook. Her clothes spread wide, and mermaid-like a while they bore her up. But long it could not be, till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death.
Alas, then she is drowned.
Drowned. Drowned.
Who did Gertrude get this story from? She never tells us. They were close enough to hear Ophelia singing snatches of old tunes, which would put them close enough to hear the willow break and Ophelia go splashing into the glassy stream, but they would have had to be watching to know that her clothes spread wide before she sunk in them. That detail serves no other purpose. And isn't this what the Waterhouse Ophelia serves to remind us of? The proximity required for the story to even make surface-level sense. But Gertrude pulls it off, and no one voices a single doubt, or no one wanted to question her queenly authority.
I can assure you, sex is the last thing on this fucking hypothetical woman patient's mind.
And what makes you so sure?
But also, Gertrude's speech ends on Olivier's line 1463. Her brother Laertes speaks line 1464, which begins right at 1 hour, 56 minutes, 5 seconds.
Alas, then she is drowned.
Drowned. Drowned.
There's a theory that Ophelia's flowers were a medical insight from Shakespeare, nodding to herbs known to induce abortions, like rue and rosemary. So if Ophelia wanted to escape the indignity of an unwanted pregnancy, wouldn't our next question be, who was the father?
What did he want?
What did he want? What did he want? Sex.
And why wouldn't Ophelia want to bear his son? Is there any way of knowing what was in her mind? Or what lengths she was prepared to go to escape her fate?
Pile your dust upon the quick. I'm dead. I am the resurrection of the life saved.
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
Though he was dead.
What are you doing? I hate Vietnam. There's not one horse in this whole country. There's not one horse in Vietnam. There's something basically wrong with that.
I know that my Redeemer liveth.
Grateful that we've managed to survive through all of our adventures.
Yet in my flesh shall I seek God.
Whether they were real
Whom I shall see for myself. And mine eyes.
And we're getting $13,000?
And not another. We brought nothing into this world.
Let me out of here and I'll forget the whole goddamn thing. It'll be just like nothing ever happened.
The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
So yeah, it turns out there's a secret code to Shakespeare's Hamlet, and Kubrick's entire body of work is trying to decode it for us. Along the way, he made time to decode such titans as Van Gogh, Ida Rubinstein, and the Divine Edgar. Not to mention the ancient Egyptians, Mayans, and Chinese, whose names we'll never know. And some heavy hitters I've barely hinted at. Perhaps the reason so many of us get sucked into this maelstrom of Kubrick's genius is a byproduct of the genius he saw all around him. But that's a matter for my next video, Morning Creation, which will attempt to show how Kubrick's final stripe in his own private rainbow decodes one of the oldest stories ever told. Alright, I hope this plunge through the looking glass was illuminating. If it was, like and subscribe, and you'll be notified when I release my dissection of what might be Kubrick's most misunderstood masterpiece, Eyes Wide Shut. See you there.
Listen, I can't thank you enough for this. You saved my ass.
No, I'm glad I was here.
And Bill, I know I don't have to mention this, but this is just between us. Okay?
Of course.
Thanks.